People who have jobs where you go inside homes, what's the worst thing you've seen? Not a current job that I hold, but I used to be a funeral director, and I had to go into someone's home who died, and the police had to kick the door in and call us out. It was the worst thing I've ever seen. She had rubbish everywhere and looked like she never chucked anything away. She had a cat, and we couldn't see any litter tray anywhere. Just cat, crap, and urine in random corners, and more hair on her clothes and furniture than on the cat, likely. We never saw the cat, but I bet it was buried under all her rubbish. The worst thing was how she died. She must have had some form of stomach cancer because she had died choking on her own poo as she vomited it up. What happens is that if you have an obstruction in the gut, such as a tumor, sometimes it gets trapped and the body forces it upwards. And in her case, she had sicked up on her own crap and literally choked on it. It was everywhere, coming out of her nose, mouth, and in bags around her, including the one she was still holding when she died. Loads of blood too, so I don't doubt her esophagus was injured or somewhere in her digestive tract. I don't know how me and my colleague didn't get any on our shoes. Even the police struggled to not stand in any blood or crap that day. It has stuck with me for the past year after seeing it, which is no easy feat, as I have seen a few putrid sights. Story 2. I used to do domiciliary care for women who had just had a baby. For the first 3 days that they were at home after being discharged from hospital, we would go and visit them and check to see how they were all getting on. I went to one house where there was drug paraphernalia everywhere. Aside from works that were clearly being used to cook up, there were tons of mobile phones and lots of things that were obviously stolen goods. It was a really weird situation in that the partner was desperately trying to hide all the stuff while the woman didn't seem to worry that much about it. She was all but pointing things out to us. Obviously high as F though, she appeared completely clean and sober. Of course, when we got back to the hospital, we informed the authorities. It later turned out that the woman hadn't told her partner that we were going to be coming around because she wanted desperately to get out of the relationship and needed help doing so. She didn't think anyone would believe her in terms of how bad it was, both the drugs and the emotional abuse she was suffering. So she wanted us to see it so that we could reliably step in and get her and the baby out. Story 3. It's strange. I had a lot of jobs, been in probably thousands of homes, and I've forgotten almost all of them. Few stand out though. Yeah, there are the roaches, spiders falling out of vents, the smells and trash. People are pretty gross, but the worst was sad. Oldish lady who made me take off my shoes. Perfectly clean house and not a speck of dust. Plastic on the couches and not a thing out of place. I realized I needed to get in a room and told her, and she immediately did the, no, it's terrible in there. It's my daughter's room. And as always, I'm like, no, it's fine. I've seen it all, and a messy kid isn't anything to be worried about. After some prodding, she finally let me in. The mattress was torn up and bloodstained. Blood and crap and feces on the walls, holes in the walls and trash everywhere. The lady started crying, and then she told me that her daughter was an addict, and she was trying to redo the room multiple times, but her daughter would always tear it up again. Horribly sad. Story 4. I was a paramedic for years. I encountered many homes in severe disrepair or in hoarder status, but one in particular comes to mind. It was late morning/early afternoon one day, and we received a call for assistance. I do not recall the nature of the issue itself, but it was non-life-threatening. We responded to what is normally an upper-middle-class neighborhood, with nice-sized family homes. As we arrived at the address, I knew it was going to be an issue from the get-go. This address appeared to be abandoned from the exterior. The outside of the house was in okay shape, but it didn't appear as though any sort of maintenance had been performed in years. Grass as high as the Serengeti, fallen tree limbs littering the front yard, overgrown bushes, etc. The bushes closest to the front door were so overgrown that it was inaccessible. We decided to go to the back door instead. To get to the back of the house, we had to walk down the driveway in a crouched position because the trees were so overgrown it was impossible to stand straight. The backyard was fenced in, so we opened the back gate and made it to the back door. By this time, our city fire department also arrived to assist us. As is common on most medical calls, the back door was heavily crowded by an overgrown tree as well, but not to the point where we could not gain access. We knocked several times, but nobody came. We confirmed with communications that this was the correct address before we entered. The back door was unlocked, so we opened it and announced our presence. Moments after opening the door, it became evident that we were in over our heads. The back door opened up to what I imagine was the living room in front of us and the kitchen to the left. There was an unforgettable odor of mold, stale garbage, urine, and feces. It was quickly apparent why this was the case. There was no floor visible. The entire floor of the house was covered in at least 1 foot of trash, literal trash. Empty trip bags, crumpled paper, discarded rotten food waste, old torn magazines, you name it. The trash had become the new floor. The fireplace in the living room was filled with ash to the point that there was a pile of it spilling out several feet onto the floor of trash. Years of fires have never been cleaned out. Sitting in the middle of it all, covered in trash like a blanket covering his legs, was our patient. Probably mid-30s, early 40s at best. Morbidly obese, over 600 pounds, nude. He reports that he had fallen over a week earlier and was just unable to get back up. When asked how he had been sustaining himself, he said people from his church came by several times a week to bring him food and drinks. Yet despite this, it took until now for somebody to let us know. They would come give him the food and just leave. The conditions inside the house were worse than I can describe. It was so bad we had to all wear HEPA masks, and the fire department wore their SCBA for safety. It was so dirty, dank, and musty that the air itself was deemed harmful to even breathe. Bear in mind that he has been in that spot on the floor for over a week, now buried in years worth of trash. That spot had been his bed and bathroom. He urinated on himself and defecated on himself for over a week in that same spot. It was summertime in the South and he had no AC. The effort to get the patient out of the house and to the hospital is another story on its own, but I will mention that it involved the fire department having to cut trees down just to get him to the ambulance. One of the police officers that was also there reported that all the toilets were overflowed and that the bathtub was filled with water so stagnant it had turned green and had mosquito larvae living in it. I found out that a few hours after we had transported the patient, the city actually came in and condemned the property. It was so bad. The dude was really nice too. He had lived there for years but was unable to keep it up, but too proud to ask for help. So instead, he lived in utter squalor, worse than any house I'd ever been in. I think about that guy regularly, wondering where he is today or if he ever made any improvements to his situation. That sucks, man. I think a lot of people see stuff like this and they go, well, he shouldn't have let it get that far. How does that even happen? But it's crazy how easy it is for something like that to just spiral out of control. At a certain point, you feel so deep in the hole that it's easier to just keep digging than try and climb out. I hope he's doing okay. Story 5. This one is bad, not so much for its gross factor, but rather the circumstances. I used to work in pest control in a major city, and this included so low-income rentals. I was inspecting for bed bugs when, sure enough, I found them in one of the units. Being that this was a number of years ago, it was, and probably still is, standard practice to toss out the mattress entirely. Have you ever tried to tell someone who probably has no disposable income that they need to throw out their mattress and buy a new one? That pretty much killed my day. Edit. I didn't expect this to catch on. I thought I would add a little bit more context to the overall conversation. When I first started with this company, the resurgence of bedbugs was still a pretty new phenomenon, and credit to my employers, they moved quickly in researching and improving our approach. We eventually moved on to recommending mattress covers certified for bedbugs, heat treatments, and even integrated a bedbug sniffing dog. We also started doing lectures for hotels in the area, training the staff in what to look out for as they were cleaning rooms, and I would translate in Spanish. I eventually went back to school full-time, but man, that whole aspect of my job moved so fast in terms of management and equipment. Dude, that thought has always terrified me, man. I don't even know how you get rid of bedbugs. When I was younger, my grandmother got bedbugs and she burned her house away. And that's not an exaggeration. She literally burned everything in her house trying to get rid of them. And I've been terrified and very clean in prevention ever since. Story 6. I walked into a house where a family had 2 dogs that they'd trained to use those pee pads, but instead of throwing them out, they just laid a new one on top. The stench was bad, but the ammonia smell actually burned my nose. How people can go nose blind to that, I'll never understand. Had a hoarder once in a giant multi-million-dollar home. I worked my way through a path to get upstairs and saw that the only accessible area was the master bed, and even then only a 2-foot wide path. Down the hall, I could just make out 6 bedrooms and probably a bathroom, but crap was stacked up nearly to the ceiling, making it completely inaccessible. The woman that owned the home said she hadn't been down to the end of the hall since the early 90s. I've seen lots of hoarders. It usually catches me off guard because it can be any house or apartment. They can look completely normal from the outside. Story 7. I was a cable TV guy in the 80s and a TV tech in the 90s. I've been to hundreds of homes from New Jersey to California to Washington. I've seen a lot. I've been to high-rise ghettos, scary desert trailers, and filthy welfare homes. But the worst was Mrs. Smith. She was elderly and lived alone in a trailer in the woods of Washington State. She wasn't completely alone. She had a whole herd of little yap-yap dogs and a few cats. She was a hoarder and wasn't very big on cleaning up. As soon as she opened the door, the stench of urine burst into my lungs. She waved me in. The electric heat was set to extreme, which did not help the smells. The carpet was filthy and squished and crunched under my feet, squished from the urine, crunched from the ground in cat litter. The smell was so overpowering I had to suck in air through my teeth. Mrs. Smith yelled at her dogs the entire time. "Pepper, you get away from that man now! Settle down, Pepper! Pepper!" This was repeated so often that 20 years later, I can still hear it. Her wooden console, Grandma TV, was bad, and she had an extended warranty that covered everything. A previous tech had found the CRT was bad. I was dispatched to replace it. Now, kids, replacing a big CRT in a TV was a tough job. You had to gut the TV, replace the CRT, then spend a lot of time adjusting the magnetic yoke, the 3 colors, the equivalent of gamma, and the corner correction to minimize ghosted images. On a good day with no errors, this was a 2-hour job. And there was no way I could survive 2 hours in that house. When my knee hit the carpet, it went squished and crunched, and I got soaked with pee. I thought hard and fast, and told Mrs. Smith that due to the size of the job, I had to work outside. I hauled that enormous heavy TV outside myself and put it on some cardboard. It was already dark outside, winter in Pacific Northwest for you, so I set up lights. The new CRT went in okay. I ran an extension cord from the house and did the CRT and yoke adjustments with my pattern generator as an input signal. I got it as close as I could, then I hauled the TV back inside and connected it to the cable TV. To my relief, she was happy with the picture. It wasn't my best alignment job, by all means, but it was good enough. She signed the paper as I held back my vomit. Once outside, I breathed in the cold night air in huge lungfuls. This staved off the vomit, and I went home. Next day, I approached the tech who ordered the part. "Joe, what the F? That house was disgusting, man." He laughed. "Hey, the part was bad. I ordered it. Not my problem, you got dispatched. Oh, she renews her extended warranty every year without fail. You'll be back." Fortunately, I got laid off that summer. Story 8. Not a job, but I moved out of my apartment and told the girl living there that I'd be back the next weekend to clean my room and the common areas, living room and kitchen and bathroom. She was notoriously dirty, and I wanted to make sure that I received my deposit back. I took the items that I was paid for. She was incapable of shopping for anything. I took the remaining toilet paper, leaving the partial roll, my shower curtain, my pans and plates and dishes, my food, and the rest of my stuff. I came back a week later to find rice covering the whole floor. She didn't have pots or pans, and instead of buying one, she attempted to cook using one of her plates. By the evidence of the half-melted plate on the stove with congealing food in it, why the stupid female dog didn't use the microwave, I don't know. She'd also melted a kettle to the back burner. I had to buy 2 replacement burners for the stove. She stopped using the toilet when she ran out of toilet paper and just left it unflushed and started using the bathtub instead. Bits and pieces still clinging to the back of it where the shower head wouldn't reach. Plates stuck to the floor under the couch, snotty tissues covering her bed so she was sleeping in her snot. She had flunked out of the graphic design program and took it rather hard. Food in the bed. I'm talking crackers, pancakes, syrup. That was just some of the recognizable foods. Food was everywhere. Actually, I found that she had been stashing her empty Slim Fast cans in her dresser. There were just so many things to clean. It was gross. Story 9. Used to clean up apartments after people had moved out or been evicted. One apartment was Section 8, and the tenant who was receiving the Section 8 got cut off because she broke a bunch of the Section 8 rules. Apparently, the last 6 months of her living there, she had actually moved out and turned off services, but still let her kids live there. Late teens to early 20s, I think. So the kids who lived there trashed the place. When I got there, the floor was covered by 2 feet of trash, clothes, and broken furniture. Food had been left to rot all over, and the place was filled with bugs and fleas, and it smelled like a garbage dump. The worst, though, was the bathroom. The water hadn't been on in a good long while, but they kept crapping in the toilet until it filled up. Then, when that had gotten full, they crapped into the bathtub into 5-gallon buckets that they had left around the house. All in all, it was about 200 pounds of human feces in the tub. I had to bag it up in 1 pound bags, bag after bag after bag, then put no more than 5 bags in a sealable pail and take it to a special waste treatment site. Second to that was the 5+ bedroom party house that a bunch of professional snowboarders had lived in for a year or two. They got evicted for not paying rent or something like that, and they had thrashed the place before they left. The worst thing in that place was that there was a gap, maybe 3 to 4 of an inch, between a bathroom vanity and a piece of glass for the shower enclosure. Someone, or maybe all of them, decided that they were going to store their used condoms there. At least 100 of them were stuck in there. It was gross, moldy, and eventually we had to rip out the vanity because that was the only way to ensure that anything was clean. Story 10. I work in the restoration business, deal with insurance companies, claims for water, fire, mold, etc. I had just started my job a month before I was sent to the worst house I've ever been in. There was a house that took the bank from someone because they defaulted on the mortgage. I was sent in to clean the house out. She was a hoarder. She had no running water and had not once taken her garbage bins to the curb. Not even kidding, they were the cleanest things on her property. 2 garbage bins that were spotless, not a speck of dirt inside them. The house, however, had 18 inches of garbage covering the whole floor of the house. Pringles cans everywhere full of crap, a pile of used pads beside her bed, as high as my waist and about 4 feet in diameter. Tea bags piled from the top of the counter to the bottom of the upper cabinets, a pile of used toilet paper taking up every bit of her bathtub, and about 4 feet higher than the top of the tub. There was a spot under all of the garbage that she was burning her clothes and left a big burn mark into her hardwood floor. Mouse crap everywhere and dead mice. It was also the middle of the summer when I had to go in. It was about 25 to 30 degrees Celsius out over the 4 days I was there. We filled 2 massive dumpsters up with garbage, and that was easily the worst 4 days of my entire life. Story 11. I used to work for AT&T. As with what comes with the job, I had to be in a lot of people's houses. The places I visited ranged from an Italian mafia's house, to a clock collector's, to a house in the worst part of Lake Worth, Florida. Most of the houses I've been to left a slight impression on me, let me see into people's lives a little bit, usually private, but those 3 stood out to me the most. Being on topic, the last house was the worst house I've ever seen. First off, when we showed up, the yard was covered in trash, and I mean literally covered. The owner could have told me she lived on a landfill, and I would have believed her. Problem is, when she answered the door, she immediately stammered out about raccoons getting into the trash and making a mess of the yard. Me and my trainer didn't even ask. Didn't say anything about the yard. We just wanted to get this one done very quickly. So, as the owner is showing us where she wanted everything, I noticed about 2 inches of grime everywhere, floor to the wall. I have no idea how so much built up over time. The floor was okay-ish. The only thing I could come up with is if she mopped without sweeping and didn't care about the edges of any of the floors. Yes, I had to dig into the grime. Yes, I had to wade through the landfill backyard. Yes, I tucked my pants in my boots and put gloves on. Well, the gloves was after I grabbed the old Comcast box and had to peel it off my hand. Trust me, I was so happy to finally finish that job. I checked myself for roaches every day afterwards. Surprisingly, I didn't have any on me, and I didn't see any bugs at all in that house. Really weird. Story 12. I do HVAC work on an AF base, and periodically we have maintenance on dorm rooms. This was by and large an achievement of filth. We get the key, do our rounds, and end up at the room in question. The first thing to hit us was the overwhelming stench of stale garbage, body odor, hot fridge, and mildew. Surprisingly, it was the least questionable aspect of this squatter's fever dream. Following that was mattress with only a comforter and bare pillow. Full garbage bags, knee-high in the closet. That stereotypical slice of pizza on a plate with a bite taken out and left to rot. On the top shelf, in the closet. Toilet bowl completely brown all the way to the rim, festooned with stray hair and crumbs. Roaches living in the fridge, which was full of weird leftovers, like a glass half full of milk. Dirty dishes stored in the oven. But the popped cherry on top were the overturned styrofoam bowls scattered all over the floor in each room. each one weighed down with a piece of jewelry or a small picture frame. Ruling out a summoning, we picked one up, only to find a live spider. Under each bowl there was a bug, scrambling around, still alive and all different from each other. I guess they just didn't want to kill them or throw them outside, but to keep them under a bowl indefinitely? It was so bizarre. We didn't even fix the AC. Story 13. While I've never personally had a job that required me to enter people's houses, I got to hear some pretty bizarre stories from a locksmith. Back when I was first contemplating a career change, becoming a locksmith was one of the paths I was considering. In addition to learning a bit about the trade, which really just amounted to learning how to pick locks, if I'm honest, I had a brief question and answer session with a local creator of keys. Most of the time, he told me, you're going to get simple and straightforward jobs. People losing apartment keys, forgetting combinations, that sort of thing. Sometimes you'll get interesting jobs. I had a call once where a guy trapped himself in a footlocker while trying to impress his boyfriend, totally naked. That was weird. Before continuing, he actually glanced up at the door as if to make sure nobody was about to enter his little shop. Don't tell my wife about this, he said, but there's another kind of call you get a lot of. A woman calls and says her front door won't lock, or something. You show up and she's in a robe, or completely naked. Sometimes she flirts with you, sometimes she just walks around. Never had anything come of it, but it sure seems like a lot of women want to show off for the locksmith. Although the prospect of getting a free show every so often did seem appealing, I didn't end up pursuing the career. Something tells me that the shows themselves might not have been worth the ticket price. Still, it sounds like it would have made for some great stories. You don't gotta be a locksmith for that, man. One time I delivered a pizza, guy showed up, butt naked. Let's just say that wasn't the tip I was hoping for. Story 14. Tenant who had turned a house into a hoarder house. She always paid on time, and there were never any issues with her, so I let it slide. Edit. I didn't know she was a hoarder. Wanted to add that on as a reread, because it sounds like I knew, but I let it slide. I did not know. The yearly inspection she managed to put off again and again. I finally posted a 24-hour entrance notice as I had to get it done, with or without her. She called me crying, begging me not to go in. I was like, I have to be done. I can't wait anymore. The house was basically piled 5 to 6 feet high with just layers of random crap. A tiny little goat path led from the front door to a tiny portion of a bed that wasn't covered. Guess she slept on quarter of a twin mattress, back to the toilet. A second bedroom was completely filled to within 6 inches of the ceiling. The bathroom had the door removed, as it apparently could no longer be opened and closed after a point. The basement was also completely filled. As a bonus, some crap had shifted in the basement and knocked a water line loose. I don't really know how much water was in the basement, but I found plastic storage containers in the mess, the top of which was at least 4 feet off the floor, and they were all filled with water. It took over 200 man-hours to clean out after she was evicted. We cleaned out over 80 cubic yards of just random cheap crap and trash. As we dug through it, we tried to keep family pictures and crap separate, but after court, she never bothered to come pick them up. I disposed of that stuff after a year. Her son came by one night with his father, ex-husband, who he moved in with after his bedroom was completely full of junk, asking about a rare and valuable heirloom firearm that was supposed to be in there. The father wouldn't leave us alone about it. Voicemail after voicemail, we must return his gun and so on. If we don't, he'll sue. This slowed work considerably as they had no idea where it was or if it was loaded. No one wanted to get shot moving crap. So we went from grabbing crap en masse to having to pick through it gently, looking for an effing gun. Finally, we found the gun in the closet of the completely packed bedroom. It was a cheap Saturday night special. In perfect condition, it would go for about $60 on the used market. But it was a rusty piece of crap, though. The father was a felon, so we called the cops and arranged for them to be present, called the father to collect it, and he caught a felon in possession of a firearm out of it. But hey, he had to have it back, and we did return it. It was weird as we dug through it, though. We would regularly find caches of canned foods, TP, bottled water, and random household goods. Best guess? She would buy a cache to use, then once it got covered to the point she couldn't access it anymore, she would just buy another. Something like 20 cases of TP were recovered, and like 50 gallons of bottles of vinegar. But yeah, she managed to somehow do all of this in less than 14 months. 80 cubic yards of crap thrown away. As an example, that is 4 full to the brim dumpsters that are 22 feet long by 8 feet wide by 4.5 feet deep. After that experience, I sold off the handful of individual houses I had that I rented and have stuck to multi-unit buildings only ever since. I figure with multi-units, at least there will be other tenants to hopefully inform me of weirdness like that while it's happening. After the damages portion of the eviction was done, I was left to collect $5,000 in judgment, and to her credit, she paid it off in small monthly installments over a few years. Ultimately, I heard that the next landlord that got her actually got the exact same situation, but somehow even worse than I. Hoarders are basically incurable. Story 15. I worked with durable medical equipment a while back. We delivered and set up equipment like oxygen concentrations, hospital beds, wheelchairs, and so on. I was dispatched out to repair a hospital bed that wouldn't raise and lower properly. This is typically caused by a connecting rod coming loose under the bed. I was greeted by the caregiver and saw the patient across the room just hanging out in his wheelchair and watching TV. After asking what the issue was, I went over and slid the bed out from against the wall and was greeted by a large opened box overflowing with dildos. Wooden ones. 2-footers, pink with glitter, short and stout, you name it, he had it. I went wide-eyed for a split second, and at that time, the caregiver must have remembered the stash hidden under the bed because she came in and brushed it off with, "Sorry for the clutter. Mr. X is pretty peculiar with his room." I never did find out who those things belonged to, but I told my coworkers to keep an eye out when his name came back up. Another time I was dispatched for an equipment pickup. These are hit and miss because either the patient is better and no longer needs their equipment, or they have passed, and the family wants those items out of the home immediately. The house was well lit on the outside, but it didn't seem like anyone was home by the looks of their living room, visible from the porch. I knocked and waited for about 2 minutes before I even heard a faint, "Come in." I let myself into this poorly lit home. The glow of an old mosaic lamp in the corner gave the entire home an eerie vibe. There's not a soul in sight, so I call out, "Medical Equipment Company, here to pick up some items for you, Mrs. X?" I then hear the faint voice again saying, "I'm in here. Come down the hall and in your room to the left." Now, the majority of the patients we work with usually need ambulatory aid or are sometimes immobile, so wandering around a house to greet the patient wasn't weird to us. But as I made my way down the hall, I hear the faint voice get louder and louder until I enter the room where it was coming from. There, laying on the ground, was a little old lady with a smile on her face. On top of her laid her now deceased husband, who had passed in the morning. As she tried to readjust him, his corpse fell on her and kept her down there until I was able to make it over to her. I rolled the man's lifeless body off from her and called for the funeral home to come get the body. Story 16. Paramedic here. We were called to a guy blacked out on his own doorstep. We turned up and gave him a shake. Nothing seriously wrong, just too much to drink. He lets himself into the house, apologizes for the lack of lights, and tells us that there are some candles in the living room, and if we'll just follow him. I head down the dark corridor behind him while my partner flicks on a torch. There is blood everywhere. On the floor, in pools, there are soaked towels lying around. There's handprints and smears down the walls. The patient is blithely continuing on down the corridor to the living room. I can see what is clearly a kid's room at the end of the corridor. Disney princess wallpaper, doll's house, etc. I say to my partner, "I'm going in there. If he comes out of the living room, yell and we'll run for it." While I'm in the kid's room, no dismembered kid, thankfully, I hear my partner talking to someone else. Out of one of the other bedrooms comes a woman wearing only a very short t-shirt. Her legs are covered in blood. She tells us she's been having a bad period for a few weeks now and isn't sure whether she should see a doctor. "Yes, lady, yes, you should see a doctor. Get in the ambulance, we'll take you there. And then we're going to go and shower." Story 17. My time to shine. I've been lucky enough to have 2 jobs that require me to go in houses. My first job as a house cleaner for a family member's property management business. I had a house where the dad had been arrested for CP content, and they were trying to sell quickly. It was a nice 5-bedroom house from the outside, but inside was another story. It was like a horror movie. There were rooms of garbage, rooms, I say, from floor to ceiling. There was so much cat hair on the fans, on the vertical blinds, a carpet of cat hair on top of the actual carpet, kitty litter ground into the linoleum that could not be removed, worms in the cabinetry from spilled food. The bathrooms were an abomination: urine-stained underwear, used condoms, brown toilets that used to be white, horrific smells, and things in the bathtub that would give you nightmares. It took me 2 weeks to clean that place. I was young and stupid and should have told my family to get one of those specialized cleaning teams. I bet I still have cat hair in my lungs. My second job as a PO has been occasionally pretty gross as well. Most people are reasonably clean and take care of their homes, but there is still a good number of people who don't. On my very first day of field training, I went to this house and turned a flashlight on at the front window. It was late at night. The entire window moved. It was covered in roaches that scattered once they saw the light. I didn't know that many roaches could be in one home. I had another case where I was doing a walkthrough and roaches were falling from the ceiling. There were like 15 people living in the home. I don't know how they could live like that. I'd be afraid to sleep at night, just in case my mouth ever opened. I've gone to houses where they don't clean up after their animals, and my hair has smelled like cat pee for days after going inside for just a few minutes. Houses with bathrooms covered in feces, houses with people who haven't showered in months. Hoarders' homes, homes of sex addicts with dildos as far as the eye can see. I even had one house where they just kept stealing new clothes to wear and dumping the used clothes on the floor instead of ever doing laundry. There was literally about a foot of clothing on the entire floor, and they just walked on it like it was normal. I've gone to houses that weren't really houses. I've had people who live in huts or shacks with dirt floors. I didn't even know that still existed in the US. I even had one client who lived on a lawn chair on his family's property, which was bananas to say the least. I've had clients living in tents, under bushes, in shelters, or halfway houses. It is insane what people can endure. And bedbugs? Bedbugs for days. Story 18. My grandfather runs a second-hand furniture store and arrived at a house to pick up a wardrobe he previously agreed to buy. He rung the doorbell several times, but nobody answered. My granddad then looked through the window of the house, trying to see if he could notice anybody that could let him inside. While looking through the window, he saw the very same wardrobe that he was there to collect, tipped over onto the floor. He started to get suspicious and called the number that the person selling the wardrobe gave to him. It happened to be the daughter of the owner of the house. She explained that her father must have left the house without telling her, and that her alongside her brother and husband will be over to let him in and take payment for the wardrobe. They arrived and opened the door, entering before my grandfather. Before he could even step foot in the house, the daughter started screaming and ran down the street. Either the brother or husband came out, I don't know which exactly, and told my granddad that the wardrobe had fell on top of the owner of the house and that he wasn't breathing. My granddad decided that he would give them space to deal with what had happened, and that if they wanted to come back and get it another day, he'd happily do it. Luckily, he never actually saw the whole body, just the feet hanging out into the corridor. He's 76 and has seen some stuff in his time, but he describes this as the most unnerving he's ever felt. For all he knew at the time, somebody could have pushed that wardrobe onto the guy and killed him. Turns out the guy had a heart attack and grabbed onto the closest thing to him, and at some point he must have lost his balance and brung the whole thing down on top of him. Just goes to show, man, anything can happen. Story 19. Probably not what you meant, but I had a job that required me to enter abandoned houses. Some more cool stuff than terrible things, but some things stand out. 1. Opened a drawer and found a baby pacifier and some drugs and pipes next to each other. 2. Bugs wriggling in a tray of decomposing eggs. 3. Bugs wriggling in a decomposing cat. 4. Saw one bathroom in a house where the septic system was compromised. Human waste had spewed back up through the pipes and coated the floor, the tub, the toilet, and the sink. 5. Various murder sites. Bit odd, but no visual indications of what had happened. 6. One basement with pictures of women from magazines with their eyes scribbled out so hard the paper was torn, lewd comments written around them. That basement felt wrong even before I saw those pictures. The stairs felt wrong, the hall felt wrong. It's hard to describe. The rest of the house seemed fine though. 7. Another house had been the playground for some drug heads. Found syringes, some pipes, razor blades nailed down to the windowsill. Just so much adult content. Pretty standard, but that house was special. 8. One basement with the lock turned round the wrong way, and the door jamb was kicked in. Walls in the basement were covered in plastic similar to Dexter's kill locations. All that comes to mind at the moment. There's more I'll add if I find it later, but I'd have to say number 6 disturbed me the most, closely followed by number 1. Edit. Cool stuff mostly was floor plans or really cool interior decorations. As requested, here's some more. 1. a very cool multi-million-dollar house that needed about $2 to $3 million worth of repairs. It was situated on top of a hill that had stunning views. I don't think I can convey the massive size of this mansion, but it didn't have a mere garage. It had a huge courtyard and a sizable warehouse along one side. Every bathroom had amazing tile work. The master bath was larger than a studio apartment. It was built by a developer that wanted to make a patent on a new type of construction. He got his patent, but the structure suffered several issues due to materials used and contractor negligence and needed massive repairs. So he just decided to walk away. Very cool to wander around in for a few hours. I feel fortunate to have seen it. One odd thing, there was a bathroom on the second floor that you could not access at all. Just a random door on the second floor. Outside wall, no stairs to the door, no balcony, a random 3-foot hole cut in the floor, and no door to the interior of the house. Very odd. No doubt one of the cooler ones. 2. One house owned by a guy that owned a construction company. He died halfway through the renovation. There were walls missing or torn down to studs. One of the few rooms that was finished was a turquoise bathroom that had all black fixtures. Sink, toilet, tub. It looked really cool. There was a hidden stairway that took you to the master bedroom. The master bath had royal blue tile that reminded me of the indoor pool at Hearst Castle. It was like being in a lighthouse. The house was on the side of a hill and was 4 stories tall, the master bedroom making up the 4th story. One odd thing, there were 3 dead animals at that house. The most I've ever seen in one place. There was a bat in the kitchen, a squirrel in the family room, and a bird in the formal room. 3. There were 2 houses side by side that were rumored to have a secret tunnel from Prohibition times. I never found one, but I sure had fun looking. One was semi-updated, new windows, appliances. The other was all original. This property was the first time I had to pump out a flooded basement, which was an interesting experience. 4. Came across 2 full-on kitchen stoves that were wood burning, like original late 1800, early 1900 kitchen stoves. One in the pair of houses from 3, the other in a renovated Victorian house. Cool to see a massive antique preserved like that. 5. A grow house. Now, when I say a grow house, you might be thinking, oh, one room at most with a few plants and most of the space still livable. No, this was a house entirely given over to growing weed. Every room was filled with racks of plant trays and high-power lights. The entire electrical system of the house had been rewired, and black cables ran out through the main breaker box to the rest of the house. The plumbing was run to a bunch of pumps in a closet, which pushed the water to drip lines throughout the rooms. AC was also rerouted and turned into bare-bones ventilation systems. It was impressive and looked like a professional setup. No plants, unfortunately, they had already been busted. This was a 2-story, 5-bedroom house completely gutted, some walls removed, and it turned into a grow house. 6. Second grow house, but this one caught fire before they got caught. The entire roof was just missing. Few stray tiles here and there in the backyard. I thought there was severe fire damage on the first floor. Turns out the fire hadn't touched the first floor. The walls were just coated with black mold. Story 20. A while back, must be 2007 to 2008, I was working as a healthcare assistant via an agency for an old fellow who was in the final horror show of motor neurone disease. He was ventilated and fully locked in. No movement apart from he could squint his left eye somewhat. This is how he communicated through a gridded board with the alphabet. This took time to get the gist of what he wanted to say. He could also grind his teeth. Now, this fellow had a wife who was a tad psychosis prone. She used to run away with his credit card and be found a week later in Paris, and this happened a few times. She was always decent with me, and I thought I probably would want to escape too if that was my lot in life. So my watch for the night shift began as normal. His wife had self-medicated with some vodka, and I put him to bed. Roll on 3 hours later, I hear the call from him to come into the dimly lit bedroom. This was the teeth grind over a baby monitor. I go in and head round to his side of the bed to begin the board communication. Next thing I know, the wife throws the covers off, stark naked, and was, feeling herself silly with a big old dildo. I locked eyes with my client and he started to go through the board. I have never stared at someone's eyes so intensively as I did for those excruciating 4 minutes that it took him to say his piece. Unfortunately, it only took her 3 to bang one out in front of me. The unkempt muff of a crazed 58-year-old will haunt me to my grave. Oh, and he wanted to tell me to tell her to stop hitting his leg with her rubber chicken. Guys, I did not get paid enough on that job. Story 21. Throwaway account as this was recent. We do mitigation work, including biohazard cleanup after self-unalivings, murders, natural deaths, and any kind of hazard cleanup. Anyways, we were called by property managers of a house to clean up for a family that had one of their children pass away and asked us to dispose of the contents, clean up the room, and get it back to livable condition. The son was a 20-something-year-old male. There was a paraplegic with possibly some other medical issues. The family kept him in the garage with deadbolts, locking him in, had a pet fence around a mattress on the ground, and the mattress was covered in blood, feces, and urine stains. You could tell that a lot of this was there for a long time. Had a pile of what we assumed were his clothes and things. No TV, no personal items, or a way to communicate to anyone else that we could see. The garage was not completely converted to a room and still used for storage and normal yard and garage tools. The house had a problem with rodents, and there were rats and feces from the rats throughout the garage and the house, though. I prefer not to know how the son was treated or what the exact cause of the death was, but yet I still wonder and think about it from time to time. I could write a book of all the disgusting things I've seen, from numerous hoarders, rodents, insects, city main sewage backups affecting whole apartments, buildings, bodily fluids and parts from self-unalivings, but the worst still is how that person was treated living in that garage. Story 22. Oh man, I don't even know where to start. Besides the hoarders and the bed bugs and the trash and the mold, the two things that get me the most are pets and pet food. Pets because I see people of all ages and all economic backgrounds with trashy houses, and almost all of them have pets. Almost none of them clean up after them. And I'm not talking about a little bit of mess here. I have walked into houses where entire rooms are treated like the litter box. I may have mentioned this before, but I saw a guy that was hoarding computers. He had a few dozen computer cases with various components ripped out. All of them were older that I could tell. This was in 2013, and most of the cases were P2 or P3. He also had a ton of cats, and these cats crap in a lot of these cases. When I started this job, the guy that was training me was handing me supplies, and in one box was some Vicks Vapor Rub. I asked him what it was for. He said I would learn soon enough. You would put some on your upper lip when you walked into a house to kill the smell. That was the first time that I had to do that. About the pet food, this is something I unfortunately see with older people on occasion. You see pet food, but no pets. I had to walk through this older man's house, and he had tons and tons of cans of cat food, but not a pet to be seen. When we got to where his kitchen was, the spider webs covering the entryway were so thick we thought they were Halloween decorations at first. But the one place that always stood out to me the most was an apartment complex. This older woman had an apartment that smelled so bad you could smell it from the hallway. She never answered the door. We were inspecting the entire complex, and we had to see what was going on in that place as well. The manager eventually broke the lock, and she wasn't there, but oh my gosh, the smell. Have you ever been in a room where there is so much urine it coats the door handles and the walls? I have. The woman came home when we were done inspecting the place. Poor lady broke the handle on her bathroom door and was afraid to tell management because she thought she would get kicked out. So she just used the kitchen instead. Let that sink in. The place where she made her food was inches away from human crap and pans upon pans of urine. We asked her how long ago she did break the door. She said 2 years. There was also a dead cat in there. Well, most of one, anyway. 2 years of that. Obviously, we got her help, but just imagine how many people, young and old, live in conditions like that and nobody ever knows. I have found that it doesn't matter the area or how old or young they are, your next door neighbor could be living in a hole and you would never know. Story 23. Pest control tech checking in. The one that stands out most in my mind is a case of bed bugs that I encountered a couple of years ago. It went something like this. We received a call in off the streets from a guy who was in town visiting his parents. He told us that the bed bugs were so bad that he couldn't stay in the house. Being a pest control company, we had heard this 1,000 times before, so no one thought anything of it. The first guy we sent out called the office from his truck and said it was so bad that he couldn't do anything and he refused to go back in. So, being the kind-hearted fool that I am, I volunteered to go take a look at this. I was in no way prepared for what I encountered. The couple living in the house were both blind. One had been blind since birth, and the other had been blinded in an accident just years before. Both were the absolute sweetest people you would ever meet. I immediately fell in love with them and resolved to do my best to solve their problem. Since they were both disabled, it would be a gross understatement to say that money was tight, and the house was in serious need of repair. Their youngest son and his wife had moved in not long before with their 2-year-old. It was the young one that caught my eye at first. She was covered from head to toe in bug bites. It was so bad that had this child been of school age, I am 100% certain DHS would have already been involved. It didn't take long to figure out that both the son and his wife were both high as kites, and things got interesting from there. The house itself was nasty, but it was the kind of nasty you would accept with two blind people living in the house, so that was no big shocker. There was very little clutter of any kind, and all things considered, it really wasn't that bad. The walls were the worst part, but I'll get back to that in a second. Anyways, everything was gravy until I went into the back part of the house where the kids were living. Their room was huge, and it had been converted from being a garage to a really cool setup, to be honest. They had their own living space, sleeping space, and their own bathroom. The parents never, ever went back there, and for good reason. They lived worse than any hoarder or druggie I've ever encountered. The trash on the floor, which you could not see, was at least ankle deep. I didn't wade too far into it as the piles of baggies, needles, pipes, and condoms urged me to turn the F around. As I stood there taking it all in, I started to see movement all around me. My first thought was roaches, but nope, it was bedbugs. They were crawling through the trash in daylight towards me. I'd only seen that behavior once before, but I immediately knew that this was going to be one for the record books. Remember the walls I was talking about earlier? Yeah, turns out it wasn't dirt, grease, or any of the other assorted things you usually find on nasty walls. No, it was blood. Turns out when the moon was just right and the buzz extra good, the kids would paint with the bugs they killed crawling on the walls. It looked like a scene out of a gosh dang horror movie. Try as I may, I still can't find the words to do it justice. It was mind-boggling to say the least. The baby's room was down the hall, and it was almost just as bad. Granted, there wasn't trash and whatnot around since Mom and Dad went in that room, but every possible surface was covered in bedbugs and their droppings. I swear you could smell and taste the iron in the air. It was wild and unnerving. I knew I had to do something because there was no way I was letting that baby stay another night in that room. Oddly enough, this wasn't the end of the horrible things I encountered that day. The more I talked to everyone in the house, the more I learned about the events that had transpired leading up to me walking into their house. Turns out Mom and Dad had known from quite some time that something was biting them all night, every night. So like any normal person would do, they hired a bug guy to try and solve the problem. He had been telling them over and over again that they had a massive flea problem and had been billing them $125 a pop for 2 years to take care of the issue. I had never heard of this guy or his company, but it became painfully obvious what was going on here. This piece of crap figured out pretty quickly that these were trusting, good, but unfortunately not too smart people. He took advantage of them, lied to them, and outright stole from them. Once the baby moved in, he knew the jig was up and just stopped answering their phone calls. He knew it was just a matter of time before someone saw the condition that poor child was in and started asking questions around. At this point in the story, I'm proud to say that with a lot of work, a few painful conversations, and the goodwill of more than a few people, that the ending is a happy one. I enlisted the help of the oldest son, and he was able to get the house cleaned out while the church they attended paid for 2 weeks' stay in a hotel. They lost every bit of their furniture to the bugs, but it didn't take long for the local charities to catch wind and come running rescue. While all this was going on, I went to work. I killed everything in that house, and I mean everything. If anything did survive, I have no doubt its descendants will tell the tale of the day their species was virtually destroyed. I showed no mercy. The son and his wife got the help they needed and are clean and sober to this day. After a small absence, the youngling was returned home and is doing well. I still stop by and check on them from time to time, even though I don't think the dog has ever forgiven me for the gosh dang awful crap I blanketed his house with. We turned the a-hole bug guy in the plant board, and last we heard they had suspended his license after talking to both us and the victims of his scam. So, gross beginning, but happy endings all around. Story 24. Too long didn't read. A drug house. I'm self-employed, and sometimes when the bills need to get paid, but I'm not finding work, I'll take odd jobs. I asked a friend who's a foreman on electrician jobs if they needed help, and he told me that they didn't, but he had something I could do for money. Enter some drug houses, stage left. He owned a small house out in the country that he had rented to a step-sibling. While he was away, she drifted into a full-on addiction, and when he returned, he had to evict her. I would clean out the trash and separate items that go to the dump from the burnable items, and he'd pay me $1,000. He warned me that it was dirty enough to be dangerous, but that he'd provide gloves, tools, and a respirator face mask. So I took the job. I showed up and I could not believe my eyes. The mask was 100% necessary, by the way. I could smell animal excrement from about 20 feet outside of the house. The trash was piled at least waist high in every, and I mean every room or space that wasn't occupied by the strange dog kennel labyrinth that wound its way through the living room. A spare room was obviously dedicated as an animal bathroom, since letting them out would have been too much effort, I suppose. Feces were almost a foot deep in some places. I don't think I could venture to guess how many dogs had been crapping and peeing in that room or for how long, but I tucked my overalls into my work boots and I still had to get through a can of off every day I was there to keep the literally millions, possibly billions, of fleas within manageable range. I attempted to pull up the carpet in the main room, only to discover that it was inches of matted dog hair stuck to the laminate flooring, thousands of needles littered in the floors underneath all the filth, thankfully not in the animal areas though. Food, bio-waste, you name it, it was on the floor. It took about a week, but I got it out of there. When I started, I was worried about snakes and critters, but it was so disgusting that only the insects I saw inside the house were fleas. I've never seen anything close on Hoarders or in any fictional depiction of a drug house. The money was good though, I guess. Story 25. Happened to a former co-manager. Did some side work doing lead abatement, asbestos removal, and cleaning and repairing the occasional health-condemned home. They weren't often, but they were almost always issued through senior/disabled services with standard health and hoarding issues. He had an emotionally rough one. A much older foreign woman had lost her son and grandchildren tragically, somehow after she had located to the U.S. She didn't speak English and hadn't been in the U.S. long, so didn't know how to use many of the amenities offered to her. The family were her only access outside, and they didn't have anything in place to help her transition. He was called to do a potential water leak and smell, walked into a ridiculously clean yet terribly smelly house. All the utilities aside from the gas was turned off due to non-payment. She was burning her garbage in the bathtub, catching rainwater in a windowsill to flush her toilet, and though she figured out how to buy groceries, she kept them in the fridge that didn't have power. All of her food was rancid, but she was desperate and was begging the guy not to take them, going out of her way to open up and eat the food he was trying to throw away. He left to make a call and get SDS to help, but came back to her cooking some rotted ham shank she had just thrown away to prove to him it was fine. It was so tragic. SDS just wasn't motivated to help the woman at all, particularly to do their language issue. So he took it on himself and approached a couple of churches in the area, found a community a couple towns over that offered her help and had people check in on her. They kept in contact until she passed. Story 26. I used to be a cable guy and I saw a lot of stuff. Some gross, some weird, and some sad. Gross. I saw the normal roach problems in houses. No matter how long I worked, I could never get used to 30 roaches scattering when I picked up a cable box. I went into the basement of a low-income apartment complex where they had either set off a bunch of bug bombs or had an exterminator come out. How did I know? The floor was so covered in large roaches, 2 to 3 inches long, by the way, the floor crunched. Think Temple of Doom. Okay, I've seen plenty of houses covered in animal crap and trash that I started not noticing. One day I went to a house because their phone wasn't working. It had been raining for a few days and they warned me the basement had flooded. So I go out and open the cellar door and the smell of a backed up sewer hits me. I peeked my head around the corner to see that their GFI had tripped. So I put on some rubber boot covers and reset it for them. I politely told them that it wasn't just rainwater downstairs, and what the cause was in case it happened again and got out. Weird. The weirdest thing I recall was a 3-foot-long dildo that was about the size of my calf. Really hoping the lady didn't actually use that because, ouch. I worked in the city, and being white, I stuck out like a sore thumb. Little old ladies would tell me I was crazy for working alone, but no one ever messed with me. I guess being 6'4" and 260 pounds helps, but I wasn't afraid to go anywhere. But one house had me wanting to get out fast. Basically, the guy was constantly locking his door. If I went out to my van right in front of the house, I would come back to a locked door. He'd let me in and lock the door behind me. After the third time, I started to realize why. The guy was a drug dealer, and money and drugs were all over. I found a few guns hidden behind the TVs. He got the bare minimum service since I didn't want to be there when he got raided. Last but not least, the sad stuff. I had to call DCFS on some piece of crap that was beating his kid so loudly I could hear it outside. When I got in, the kid was really tentative and wouldn't talk or even look at me. I talked to the kid as soothing as I can and just explaining what I was doing, and they warmed up to me enough that they wouldn't totally avoid me. It took a lot to not beat the living heck out of this guy. Called DCFS on the neighbor of the customer I had. He was beating a kid that sounded 2 or 3 at oldest. I heard him yelling stuff like, "Shut the F up!" and the kid would scream louder as he was hitting it. Then there was the home run daycare that I actually got shut down because of the filthy conditions inside there. It was really sad. Story 27. In a house full of dollar store Christian stuff covering every wall and surface, I was looking for the downstairs T-stat, and I followed the wires to a room. Inside, I found 3 of those $500 sex swings hanging from the ceiling in a triangle facing each other. There was even a rubber, non-slip mat under them so you know they did not slip in the lube. There was a 32-ounce container of lube on the shelf. There were 2 TVs and a PC with loads of adult content DVDs to watch. I changed out the faulty T-stat and I got the heck out of there. The only problem I was worried about was that the new T-stat was bright white and shiny hanging on the wall with its bright new digital readout. When I went upstairs to get somebody to sign the ticket, there were no adults there. Just a group of about a dozen 12 to 18-year-olds playing video games. Yeesh. I went back to work and went to a cubicle, typed up a report about what I had witnessed. I had them file a copy with the work ticket in the file for that address. This was read by the secretaries and all the way up to the owner. We no longer provided any services to that address, and they were not billed for the service call. I was interviewed by CPS a few days later. I do not think any action was taken against the family, but like I said, yeesh. Story 28. I delivered furniture one summer in college. Not much fazed me, and I tried not to judge too much, but I remember one particular house as being truly awful. I don't know if hoarder is the correct term here for these people, so much as complete effing pigs. Garbage, laundry, junk, dishes, other things that don't even belong in an apartment, piled up to a minimum depth of probably 2 feet and closer to 4 near the walls, with little paths cleared through to the sofa, the TV, the bedroom, and bathroom. No urine bottles. Thank God for small favors, I guess. I'm guessing the paths sort of collapsed in every now and then, and they just shovel it back up towards the walls. From the looks of it, the junk piled in the kitchen, and the pizza boxes and McDonald's bags everywhere else. It looked like they'd abandoned cooking and lived exclusively on delivery, takeout, and soda. So, we're delivering these people a new bed set. Frame, box spring, and mattress. My coworker and I somehow get the frame up to their door, through the living room, and into the bedroom without causing a trash slide. Per our company policy, we had to offer them free setup. Coworker and I are both silently pleading to every deity possible that these people would turn it down. Of course they didn't. The lady tried to clear a space for us. The man sat on the couch being useless. But their old sleeping arrangements were a mattress on the floor covered in 2 feet of detritus. She manages to get about 3 square feet cleared and asks if that's enough room. No, it's not. But at least we have a place to see the nuts and bolts without losing them to the abyss. Plus, we've got other deliveries to get to. So my coworker and I try to unpack and put this thing together, and it's Laurel and Hardy levels of slapstick as we'd wrangle and balance these pieces into place, slipping and stumbling on junk the whole time. Eventually, we get the dang thing together, go grab the box spring and mattress, and chuck them onto the frame. This thing is comically elevated off the ground and cockeyed, due to the corners resting on literal piles of garbage, but F it. It's the customer's job to deal with it once it's delivered and put together. We pack up and get the F out of Dodge and laugh our butts off in the truck in that way that people do when crap just gets too weird. So anyways, you've probably got a mental image of these people, about 300 pounds each, dressed in stained pajama clothes, unkempt hair, and greasy faces, right? Nope. This was a young, well-dressed, and very attractive couple with apparently good careers. Hoarders come in all shapes and sizes, I guess. Oh, they also didn't tip, so F them. Story 29. Not nearly as bad as some others, but I had a job in healthcare where I had to visit people who were generally low income and not in good health. I'm brand spanking new to this job in this field when I decide to go visit Bob. Our first visit in his home, and Bob is usually pretty well dressed, friendly, and articulate, so I expected a normal house, if you will. He lived in a trailer park outside of city limits that I knew, but so had many other people in my life who weren't quite like Bob. So anyway, I notice crap is about to get real when I drive up his driveway and notice there's various dogs and cats littered throughout the yard. Clothes are hanging outside to dry. This was not good sunny weather, by the way. And the front screen door is very broken. I look over to the backyard and there's several broken down vehicles, bikes, etc., but none look to be in working condition. It took a while to notice, but I also realized that the various bits of broken glass on the ground were in fact beer bottles that had been busted. Why, right there in his own yard? I don't know. It's not safe for the animals at all, but in my opinion, Bob doesn't really think about these things. I can already see that inside the house, as soon as you walk in, there's a king-size bed with a gosh dang mountain of clothes covering it from inch to inch and more furry creatures sleeping here and there. I love cats and can definitely tolerate dogs, but this home was too much for me. The smell of the animals was rancid. There were various pan-style litter boxes, no covers, and just litter and feces scattered throughout the home. There was only a path to go through his house. From the door you enter to the kitchen, the bathroom, and finally to the back room that used to be his bedroom, until he cluttered it up so much he just closed the door and forgot all about it. Never went back in, but nothing ever came back out. I remember asking Bob why he kept all of these things, and his answer was so simple, but never made much sense to me. What if I need it? I won't have it if I throw it away. This applied to anything from old newspapers to rotten food. It was hard to work with Bob, but I hope he's doing better these days. Story 30. I got a good one. I used to do computer repairs for a popular tech store, not Best Buy, okay? We didn't normally do home calls, but every so often, some person would offer quite the hefty price for someone to come out and set up crap for them. Well, one day we get a woman who bought a sound system and a printer and computer, and she wants it all hooked up. We tell her we don't have that service, and she offers something to the tune of $200 side cash. And let me tell you this, I like side cash. I tell my boss the deal, and he's cool with me going over to the house in the middle of my shift. I pull up and already regret hits me like a wave of bad sushi. This yard is filled, and I mean filled with junk. I'm talking a few bathtubs and toilets, car tires, sofas, all that jazz. I get into the house and I'm punched in the face by the odor of caked-in cigarette smoke that is laden into a film on almost everything in here. In the house is a walkway that's nicely cut out of stacks of junk, like a maze of all kinds of stuff. Products she bought and never even opened. Bugs, including roaches, openly chilling on the walls, calm as bets. I walk through this ever-winding path of trash and into what she called an office. I ask her where she wants this computer set up, and she points to my left and says, "Put it right there, on the desk." Y'all, there was no effing desk. So I say, what desk? She walks over, puts her finger in a massive pile of junk and just says, "It's right here." Not wanting to seem mean, I deflect and say, "Well, do you want to clear a spot for me while I unbox this PC?" Instead of what I wanted to say, which was, "How about you clean this piece of crap off?" She clears the table off, partially. I go to put the computer down on it, but notice that the table has a massive hole in it. But like not a hole someone cut out, it's all black and soft as if some kind of rot corroded through it. I'd say it smelled, but the house had such a choking cigarette smell that I couldn't notice. At this point, I'm so ready to leave that I just lay the computer over this thing, plug it in, and turn it on. I go back to the car and get the sound bar, the subwoofer, and bring it in to hook up to the TV, which isn't mounted on a wall or sitting on an entertainment center. No, it's balancing on some more trash. But like, since you rarely need to actually tough a TV up, she has a whole field of trash between my cutout path and the TV on the trash hill. So I can't simply walk into Trash Mordor. I have to make this epic journey across the room to get to Trash Tower. I pop the plugs into the TV, then try to kick away some garbage to clear a spot for the subwoofer to sit at, when two dead cats are just chilling under some grubble. "Holy crap!" I exclaim. She looks over, sees what I see, and says, Those aren't mine. In a super sincere and concerned voice. I am 300 million% done with this situation, and I just lay the subwoofer on top of the cats. Gently, though. I make the return journey through Trash Mordor back to my safe path, collect my $200, and hit up my house for a shower before going back to work and telling the story, Lord of the Things, the two cats. I think that's the saddest part, man. Like, yeah, it sucks when your life gets out of control, and I feel bad for these people in general, but these poor animals, man. Like, every single one of these stories has some animal being mistreated or not taken care of or dead. So, just a lesson, if you feel like you can't take care of yourself properly, you probably shouldn't be trying to take care of a pet. Story 31. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. When I was 18 years old, I worked at a major home improvement chain, and sometimes I would volunteer for overtime on my days off to be a rider on the delivery truck. We would deliver any item from the store, but it was primarily appliances because they would often get free delivery. Our store had a program that partnered with the local electric company. People of low income could apply to this program, and a representative of the company would come out and look at their appliances. If they determined that the appliance was old enough, and thus not energy efficient, they would approve them for this program, where the store would purchase them a new appliance, usually fridges or freezers, and we would deliver them, install them, and take the old one away. And we hated these deliveries because the houses were usually filthy and the people were often ungrateful and rude. On any given day, we could be out for 12 hours, and we could have 2 hours of drive time between stops. I think we were only a handful of stores to be a part of this program, so we would go all over the state, which is awesome to an 18-year-old kid. Overtime pay to sit on my butt in an air ride seat? Effing yeah, man. So anyway, one day we had a full delivery schedule. We left at 6 a.m. and we had enough deliveries and drive time to probably still be on the road at 9 p.m. We delivered to about 6 houses. I make about $50 in tips and we are ahead of schedule. It's coming up on 5 p.m. and we call the last delivery. I tell them we are about an hour out. She says she will be home. It's all good. She says we can park behind the house and come in the back door. Well, we roll up on the address right on time and it's not a house, it's a trailer. Seems to be a single wide. But as we go around to the back of the trailer, we realize that it's not a single wide trailer. It is in fact half of a double wide trailer. The whole other side of this house is just the effing plastic that they put up when they were delivering it. And this isn't like a new trailer. It's obvious that they have been living here for years. The plastic is patched with tarps and duct tape. The siding is covered in green algae. The windows are busted. So I'm thinking there's no way this is the right place. I walk over to the back door, which turned out to be another hole in the plastic, with a door and door frame just slapped onto it. Flaps along with the plastic. I knock on the door and a man answers. No shirt, no shoes, just a big old round tummy and filthy gray basketball shorts. He gave me his name and yep, unfortunately, this is the right place. So I ask him if I can come look at the old fridge so I could work up a game plan on how to swap these refrigerators out. And he opens the door to let me in, and then just a wall of stench hits me in the face. Smells like I'm breathing the inside of a jug of ammonia. I soldier in though, and I see a 5-gallon jug of that Bayer roach spray. That's never a good sign. The hallway is half-sized. I assume the other would have been on the other half of the house, so it's about 2 feet wide. The hallway is also cluttered with boxes, trash, and leaves. The woman I spoke to on the phone is sitting in a lazy boy, holding back 2 pit bulls by chains who are trying their dangest to get to me. We get to the kitchen/living room, and I take a look at the fridge, and I make my way back through the clutter to get out to my driver. On the way out, I happen to look down the hallway past the back door, and I see a bedroom, which must have belonged to the dogs because there was a visible 3-inch matted down crust of dog crap all around this 10 by 10 room. In order to have this much dog crap, those 2 dogs must have been 10 years old and never crapped anywhere else in their life except this room. I finally make my way out of this heck house to my driver. I tell him the horrors I saw inside, and we have a long discussion about our next course of action. As we're talking, the man comes to the doorway, sees us talking, sees his new fridge, and screams, says we are taking too long, and the fridge is the wrong color. He's not paying us to stand around and talk. They have important things to do. We are just such a huge inconvenience on him and his family. I saw my driver hit his boiling point. 12 hours in a truck, still an hour from home, and we are getting berated by this a-hole who, mind you, getting a fridge for nothing. A fridge that was nicer than the one we had in our homes. I should also say we had a rule. If we saw bugs in the old appliances, we did not have to take them with us, for fear of contaminating the other appliances in the truck. My driver doesn't say an effing word, calmly walks past the man, with me following. He strolls up to the refrigerator, grabs both of the top corners, and puts his knee in the front of the fridge with everything he had. The refrigerator door dents in a solid foot, and out from the bottom of the fridge comes a cloud of cockroaches, an effing blanket of roaches scurrying in all directions. The driver stops, looks at the sea of roaches he has unleashed upon this kitchen, and states, "You have bugs." So the half homeowners, the time, the dogs, we are all silent. Just effing dead but quiet as my coworker walks out of the house. He gets up in the truck, takes out the new fridge on the dolly, and dumps the effer in the backyard. We hop up in the cab and drive away. The recipients of the new refrigerator never called to complain. Sorry, this post ended up being really effing long. Story 33. Not me, but my dad used to install items to assist disabled and elderly people. Handrails, concrete ramps, things like that, and saw some pretty bad stuff. There was a woman who was near bedridden and didn't get any help, was just peeing into the same bedpan and emptying it into a large container under the bed. Hadn't showered in weeks, only got up to refill a large water container and get food. He called the emergency services about that. Probably the worst one he told me about was actually a seemingly fit and normal man who spent most of the time just watching old reruns on high TV. After a while, he started speaking casually to my dad, and just mentioned out of the blue that he had a late-stage brain tumor and only around 2 weeks left to live, and he just sat there watching crappy daytime TV. He hadn't spoken to any friends or family, assuming he had any. He wasn't trying to complete a bucket list. He wasn't even spending the last of his money on nice things. He was just dull to his own existence, and could find nothing better to do in his final days than stare blankly at a TV that didn't even have anything good on. What makes it worse is I have to imagine that is how he spent much of his life, and I have to imagine his own impending death was a little significance to him. I can only wonder what thoughts entered his mind on the last day. I can only wonder if he even looked at old photographs or cooked his own favorite meal or ever went on a nice walk. The story of that man, who I never met, affected me deeply. That's a hard spot, and it's important to live life to the fullest, but I would play devil's advocate and say I've unfortunately had people in my life know that theirs was coming to an end soon, and while it might look dull to you, for some of them, kind of living in the mundane routines of life was sort of peaceful to them. Some version of denial, for sure, but living as if there was no pressure to make the most out of these final seconds made them happier. Which is, of course, still very sad, but as someone who's never been in that position myself, I'm always trying to be wary of judging how they want to utilize their final moments. Story 34. Late to the game here, but I was a security guard. I was tasked one day with going to a condo and letting air conditioning guys into units and just supervising them. Basically, in case they kick over or steal an Xbox, I can take note of the fact that it happened. On one of the last units of the day, I knock 3 times. No answer. We go in, and the place smells bad. Rotten eggs and something else. The guys go to work on the air conditioner, and I see a moldy cake sitting on the counter. The house is otherwise spotless. I made a joke about this rotten butted cake that the person left while they went on vacation. I suddenly look over to the bedroom. There was a black woman, hunched over in her bed. She almost looks embarrassed? Maybe she's hiding her face because I just made fun of her standard of living. So I say, "Oh, sorry, ma'am." No movement, no noises. Ma'am? I say, walking closer. In my shock, I simply wasn't putting 2 and 2 together. Without seeing the woman or even glancing into the room, the worker burst past me and says, "She's dead, dude." So I'm standing there at the threshold of her bedroom, looking at her slumped unnaturally forward, and she's an older black woman with some discolored skin patches and what is obviously a strawberry blonde wig. The smell is unbearable this close. I wonder if vomiting right on her floor would be contaminated in a crime scene, so I run into the hall. The workers have gone to the desk guard to call 911. I'm frantically filing out of my notebook. I often skipped filling out my legally required notebook on weekend gigs like this one. I had a regular full-time job elsewhere. The desk guard comes in and I go in again with her. The 911 operator tells her she is obligated to touch the body to make sure she cannot be revived. She almost does it, but I tell her not to. We go into the hall. The desk guard tells me she is a 27-year-old Caucasian substitute school teacher. Remember how I thought it was an elderly black woman in a wig? She hadn't been seen by the guard in weeks. Police say it was a self-unaliving. Pills, will, and testament, and a self-unaliving note were found with the body. I couldn't eat until late that night. Had my favorite wonton soup at my favorite sushi place, and I can't eat it anymore. Smelled the body all over again somehow. Maybe I just needed a shower. Security company offered to pay for my counseling. I didn't take it though. Me and the desk guard got Employee of the Month, which entailed getting a prepaid visa alongside our pay stubs. Story 35. Maid and I had a lawn mowing business. We were asked by another guy if we could take over his for a couple of months because he had hurt his back. His run was over several upmarket suburbs, not mega wealthy, but certainly higher than average house prices. He gave a handwritten list of addresses and services for each. One of the houses we went to was well presented from the street. Nice lawn and garden, double garage under the house, which was on a sloping block. We mowed the front lawn and noticed there was a bit of a smell near the garage doors. Thought it might have been a stinky drain. We weren't sure what services we were supposed to do, as the list wasn't clear. So we knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. Then went to the back of the house, but there was no lawn there. It was just overgrown with weeds. Outside the kitchen door was a pile about a meter high and a couple of meters in diameter of empty wine flagons. We looked through the kitchen window, dirty and covered in redback webs, and saw a pile on the kitchen floor where someone had been grilling on the stove and discarding the alfoil. We could see a bit into the house, and it looked like there was no furniture. Next week we went back and knocked again, and this time the door was answered by a 14-year-old boy. He said he didn't know what needed to be done as he had just moved here. Again, we got a look into the house and couldn't see any furniture. Mowed the front lawn again and left. A few days later, we got a call from the guy whose run it was to say the house owner was really upset we hadn't trimmed her lawn edges. So we told him about our convo with the kid, and he said that they've lived there for years. We said we would be there first thing in the morning to do the rest of the job. When we got there, the lady who owned the house was there, mid-40s and nicely dressed as if for an office job. She stood and watched as we did the edges. We asked her to open the garage doors so we could do the center strips of the driveway. When she did, we found out what the smell was. Definitely not a stinky drain. Piled a couple of meters high across the width of a double garage were full garbage bags. Then we got the full smell and finished the job gagging. Too long didn't read. House and owner present nicely, but have a dirty, smelly secret. Story 36. Not me, but my mother used to work in home health care in Alaska. She told me a horror story about this ex-Navy SEAL she was assigned to take care of every other day. Let's call him Jim. He was an obese man, drank beer with every meal, smoked cigarettes and other substances despite being told, and the poor wife looked like she was skin and bones. Clearly what little income they had went towards his dinner plate. Like any medical professional, my mom would tell him common sense advice on how to live a healthier life. His response to anything she said to him was, "I don't have to put up with this. I was a Navy SEAL. You can't tell me what to do." One dandy afternoon, Jim asked my mother for a drink from the refrigerator, since his wife was asleep on the couch. She stopped sorting his medicine and got him a Budweiser, saying something along the lines of, "This should be your last drink today." His reaction was to pour it on the floor and respond once again, "Don't tell me what to do. I was a Navy SEAL." And my mother retorted, "And now you're a whale," and never went back to that crap hole ever again. Story 37. I am a telecom field tech. I had a call to go install a telephone jack in a bedroom of a main floor house. The customers were a couple in their early 20s. The house was a disaster. Dirty clothes laying all over, food, dog crap, empty soda cans piled on end tables, and very smelly. The floor was 87% covered. Found out the bedroom was even worse. If you ever smelt an overdue hamper mixed with stale cologne and sweaty used clothes, imagine that, but an entire room. I was walking on a foot thick of dirty clothes and whatever else. I somehow found a baseboard telephone jack, but not working. I asked the customer to show me the basement so I could take a look at the D-Mark. The basement was somewhat clean, nothing except a love seat and a twin mattress on the floor with a small TV in the right corner and some other small furnishings. Unfinished ceilings with Pink Panther fiberglass insulation and some falling from gravity stuffed between the rafters. Turns out the basement is being used by another couple as an apartment. I could see the line coming from the upstairs bedroom to the D-Mark on the front of the house where the electric panel was. The bedroom being at the back of the house was above a windowless furnace room. I asked the tenant of the basement apartment to go into the furnace room, which was closed. The tenant was hesitant, but I informed him I needed to see where the telco line dropped down from the bedroom, as I suspected damage as it was still connected to the D-Mark. He opened the door to a dark room where I could hear the furnace running. Immediately, I got hit in the face with the pungent smell of an overused cat litter box. The dense ammonia smell was so overpowering I had to turn my head to the side to try and take a quick breath of what was left of fresh air as it enveloped my head. The guy turns on the light. Naturally, I wanted to trace this line to its source as quickly as I could. Looking up, I can see the line as I walk into the room. I then looked down to make sure I wasn't going to trip on anything. I then see the culprit of the foul smell. A large litter box absolutely filled with urine and crap, as if 3 cats were using the same box for the last 3 weeks. And beside the animal's toilet was a playpen, with a small baby boy about 13 months old silently standing there, holding onto the side, looking up at me with a bit of a stranger danger face. I looked at him and then he gave me a little smile. I still remember the heart palpitation I felt when it clicked on what I was seeing. I managed to calmly tell the man if he could please move the playpen out of the room as I stared directly into his eyes, so I knew he understood me. I remained calm and finished my work while I watched this little boy walking barefoot in his basement. He did not seem to be in any kind of distress for the short time I was there, but I could not leave without doing something. This home was dangerous, so I left, parked my van down the street, and called my wife. I then called my manager and told him the same story I am telling you. I told him that my next call was to child services. I called while it was fresh in my mind. A few days later, my manager called me and told me that someone called in to get me fired. Because of privacy issues, he said he couldn't tell me who called, but to know that everything is all okay. I hope that's true. Story 38. Late to the thread, but here it goes. When I was in my early 20s, living in New York City, I worked multiple jobs to make rent. One of my jobs was at a fancy schmancy babysitting service that connected rich families with fashionable musicians, actresses, and dancers to provide childcare. Most families I worked for lived in big, fancy apartments with doormen and elevators. I got sent to a family in Brooklyn, longtime clients of the service, but first time for me. Arrived, typical Brooklyn townhouse in a nice neighborhood, basement level. Knocked, and the mom came to the door, tossed me the keys, told me her kid was 3 years old and sleeping upstairs. Don't worry about the dog, he's already been out. And also, don't go in the bedroom with the closed door. Then she just ran out, leaving me in the doorway with her keys. Bizarre, but I've seen weirder, so I went in. The first thing I noticed were the dirty diapers and dirty tissues scattered over the couch. Then I realized I couldn't see the floor, only a narrow path from the front door through the living room to the kitchen. The floor was piled up with clothes, toys, and mystery bags. Kitchen sink was overstacked with dirty dishes, flies buzzing around the corners, a bowl of brown fruit, overflowing garbage cans, etc. I ran upstairs. The kid wasn't asleep. She was just chilling on her bed, blinking at me, surrounded by mountains of crap. I smiled and said hi. She just stared at me. I ended up taking her outside for the entire time I babysat. It took me 15 to 20 minutes to find her stroller. I could not stand to be in that house. The saddest part was the little girl. She was sweet, fun, and adorable. No noticeable developmental delays, but a few oddities. She would sometimes just stare into space, and I kept catching her sticking her hands down her pants and smelling her fingers. She was still in full-on baby diapers, not even pull-ups. She didn't seem to have even begun the potty training process. I considered going into the forbidden room, but I chickened out because I was afraid of being fired. They were repeat clients to the service, and I never even saw the dog that was mentioned. When I left, I immediately reported the conditions to my boss at the babysitting service and told them I could not return to that location. They told me they knew previous sitters had told them, and I didn't need to worry about it. I still regret not calling CPS. Story 39. I'm late to the party, but I'll share my story anyways. This is more of me judging someone and getting instant karma, but here it goes. I'm a massage therapist, and up until recently I did house calls. This ended up being very stressful as a job because you get all kinds of weirdos that think they will get more than a massage. One day I pull up to this appointment at about 9 p.m. The house looked very run down and the appointments cost $155 an hour. So a red flag immediately went up in my head. Instead of going up to the door, I decide to call my client and let him know I've arrived, thinking maybe I'm at the wrong house and he'll let me know. He let me know that the massage was actually for his business partner, not him, and they would be arriving shortly. I gotta tell you, that made me scared crapless. I called my boyfriend and I told him what was going on and sent him the address in case something happened. My stomach was telling me to get the F out of there, but I ignored my gut. Finally, A woman opens the door and waves me over. I'm still very scared at this point, but I felt a little better. I go inside the house with my massage table, and it's so small I can barely move around. The house looked grimy and scary. It smelled like straight up crap in this house. I started to wonder if I was in some sort of drug den and about to get taken. Anyways, the guy arrives. Scary looking dude. And he is the nicest guy ever. Even wears swim trunks while getting his massage, which made me feel a lot more comfortable because he tried extra hard to cover up. He ends up even giving me a really good cash tip. So I get home and I'm telling my boyfriend all about it. He makes a comment that he smells dog poop. I'm explaining that the house smelled like dog poop and it was so bad, but I felt bad because the people were very nice and I was being too judgy. My boyfriend insists that there is no way the smell just stayed on me. We look on my shoes and there was a big smudge of dog poop. I must have tracked it all over these people's home. I was the one who smelled like dog poop, not their house. I still feel bad about it to this day, and I wonder what they thought about me after tracking poop through their home. That's awful, dude. That's probably why he was trying so hard to cover up. He's like, man, I don't want this smelly massage therapist really getting any skin contact with me. Yeesh. But all in all, it worked out, and I'm glad she was safe because that can be a little bit of a scary situation. Story 40. I used to show student and young professional lets, mostly showing students around houses that were being vacated by the tenants the next year, so around 80% were currently occupied. I remember seeing a lot of stuff like dildos left lying around, but there are two viewings that stick out above all else. The first was when showing four very clearly young and naive girls around a house. The lad in one of the bedrooms had warned me that the lad in the next room had his girlfriend over. So when we got to that room, I knocked and said, "Are you decent? Give us 30 seconds, was the reply. So I showed the last bedroom and went back and knocked again. "It's cool, come in," was the reply. Opened the door and the guy was butt naked, hanging out of the back of his girlfriend who was chained to the bed, both of them with huge smiles on their faces. Needless to say, the girls did not want the house. The other place was the rugby house. This house was very close to the university and wasn't one we needed to advertise, as the rugby team took it on every year and just handed us new tenants. Thing was, it was also one of the few private student houses in the city that had fully disabled access and bathroom facilities for not one, but two wheelchair students to live together. So when we had an inquiry from a group that included two wheelchair-bound kids, we had to show it. Of course, the rugby players weren't happy about this. Their place was in a state anyway. The downstairs bathroom that was so valuable to the disabled kids wasn't used as a bathroom, but a kit room, so it was caked with mud and stank of sweat mixed with deep heat. But they'd also gone as far as to write messages with their own crap on the walls just to scare off the potential clients. They'd also, rather impressively, managed to turn the entire walls and ceiling of one room into a sort of beer can Sistine Chapel. The disabled group did not sign up to take the house. I don't think they had a lot of options, and I believe there's lots more to the story, but I quit not long after that and I didn't get to hear it. Story 41. I used to do exterminating during the summers. You get to see some weird things and see all kinds of people in that job. I have been inside hundreds of homes of all types and sizes. Two stories, however, stick out to me. One is more funny and one is the thing of nightmares. There was this cool old man that was really talkative during visits to his home. He was already a customer, but I had never been there. No one ever mentioned anything weird about the place and did not make any notes in the system, so I go about the standard business, walking around, spraying some stuff, crevice and crack and treatments, and I'm about to go upstairs, right? So far, he's chatting away. Nothing unusual. The man is roughly 65 years old and is in the construction industry. We were discussing concrete furniture, and I just made my way to the stairs. As I'm going up the stairs, his phone starts ringing. I let him know I am going up there and will be done when I make my way back downstairs. He says, "Okay, go ahead," and continues with his call. So I make my way around, and this old man apparently forgot he had his sex room unlocked. I walk in there, and there are all kinds of toys, whips, chains, and stuff all over the floor. The worst part about this is not the image of a 65-year-old man using this room. The worst was the actual pictures laid out all over the floor. The picture showed all the freaky stuff him and his wife had been doing, and we're talking about bondage, multiple partners, a lot of gross stuff. Okay, you name it, they probably had a picture of it on the floor. I closed the door and didn't say a word. I finished the job and never went back. The second, and more disturbing for most of you, I am sure, is the large mansion-style lakefront home. I like to call it most people's nightmare fuel. From the outside, you would imagine whoever lives there has a good bit of money, as it's a large home, but they need to do a bit better landscaping because the grass is slightly high. I figured this place shouldn't be too bad. May take a bit extra as it's larger, but oh well. It's about midday, I get paid by the hour, right? I knock on the door and the owner opens up, and the smell is almost overwhelming. It was a mix of cat and dog feces, urine, and beer. This was not a party house, it was a family residence. I have no idea how these people lived, but oh my gosh, I have no clue how they stand the smell there, especially the kids. This was unfortunately not the worst thing. I got lightheaded just walking in, but I was there to do a job, so I pressed on. Usually that initial hit of smell is the worst. The rest you are able to get over, and a lot of places keep pet smells like that, and you just get accustomed to living in it. But if you have pets, make sure you clean after them for your health and others, please. I start making my way around the home, and everything is pretty standard until I get to the back sunroom. This room was literally rotting from the inside out. There was mold, holes in the wall, what I can only describe as a blob that looks like it would be able to eat through your skin all on the wall. Everything was half exposed to the outside, half covered. I have no clue what it was used for, but the whole side of the house should have gotten this place condemned. I would have stopped there if I knew how bad the outside of this place was once I started, but we will get to that. After seeing the sunroom, I figure it can't get much worse. It's only this one room. I let the homeowner know, hey, you need to get this fixed ASAP or you are going to lose this place and possibly get you and your family very sick. They explain they're working on it, and no, but thank me for the advice. I doubt they were going to do anything about it since it had gotten that bad, but whatever. I am just here to do my job. I can only offer so much advice. I make my way down the basement, and this is where I realize this home is beyond saving. I open the door for the basement. This time there is no overwhelming smell or anything like that. Instead, I am treated to the sight of paper everywhere. These people literally just took paperwork they put in boxes and tossed it down the stairs and left it there. Now all the paperwork was spread out, and when I asked the owner if it was all right if I went down, as I did not want to damage anything, they say, yeah, just step on it. It's just our trash collection. At this point, I should have just left. But we were already paid for the service, and I'm almost done. I just need to do this downstairs and then the outside. So I enter the abyss. Now I want you to imagine the aftermath of a huge frat party. That's what this room looked like, but instead of beer and food, it's random pieces of paperwork and dirty clothes, just a trashy place. Now some of you probably think that's not super bad. What's so wrong? But this is not what made the place nightmare fuel. The entire basement was overrun with spiders. There were webs from the ceiling to the walls to the floor. I could not walk through there without getting cobwebs all over me. You could not see the webs because the lights did not work, but you could feel them. I worked through 10 feet of it, just grabbed a broken pool stick and started swinging to knock them down so I could walk and spray. I turned into the Jedi Cobweb Master. You might be asking yourself why anyone would walk through this place, and my answer is, I treat everyone's home I visit like I would my grandmother's. I would never let her live in that type of condition, and I could at least help these people with their problem. My job was to spray and help get rid of these things, and that's what I aimed to do. The basement was pretty bad, but I did not realize how bad it was until I got to the outside of the home. Remember the back sunroom, how I said the place should have been condemned? What I saw next is what makes it nightmare fuel. When I got to the outside and started walking around the place, it was surrounded by bushes. The bushes were covered in billions of spiders. This is no exaggeration. There was more cobweb than bush, and the bushes were over 12 feet tall and 10 feet wide, each going all the way around. The bushes were all touching the home, so you can imagine they are crawling into the house somewhere. When I get to the back of the home, I realize the back half has no siding and is completely exposed. The studs in the walls are showing, and most are rotting or falling apart. I start making my way around to see how bad the place is, and you can see into the basement ceiling, drop down acoustic ceiling. Now remember the spraying I did on the inside? Well, I must have hit a nerve or something because it disturbed the nests, and there was nothing but a mass exodus of spiders coming out of the ceiling onto the side of the house, onto the trees, onto the bushes, and started dropping all around me. I stop and just run back to the truck, beating the crap out of the top of my head, my neck, and my arms. I strip off my shirt and beat it for a few minutes till I feel safe. Nothing is alive. I put my stuff back in the truck. I go tell the owners that they need to leave. There are way too many spiders for it to be a safe place to live in. And then I get in the truck and I drive a block away. I then proceed to call my boss and told him the situation and told him he can deal with it because I am never going back to that house. I have no clue what happened to that family or that home, but that place is nothing but nightmares to me. This house is what that expression, kill it with fire, was made for. If I could, I would have called a general to drop napalm on that whole block because there was no saving that place. F. Spiders, man. Story 42. Neighbors report that they foiled an apparent attempt at burglary of the house across the street. Suspects had been carrying out items in trash bags when they got spooked, fled before my arrival. Neighbors report that an old woman lives on her own there, but they haven't seen her in several weeks. I examined the objects the suspects left on the lawn, assorted small appliances, silverware sets, small electronics, but all of it is in its original, unopened, but visibly aged packaging. I enter the front door of the home, and oh my gosh, the damp, rotten mildew smell is absolutely overpowering. I almost can't breathe. Splashes of mold and water, damage across the walls, ceiling, and floors. Crap is just strewn about carelessly. More appliances and electronics and old, unopened packaging. It smells like I'm the first archaeologist to open up an ancient Egyptian tomb. I have to clear the house, so I climb the stairs to the bedrooms. They're more or less average in size. I couldn't tell you the square footage, but average bedrooms. You get the point. Or at least I assume they were bedrooms because I couldn't see the bed. I am not embellishing when I say that the entire surface area of the bedroom was piled up to my waist with junk. Effing junk. Boxes, clothes, just random bad-smelling crap. Both bedrooms are like this. Literally could not have entered the rooms if I wanted to. I'm just impeded by the depth of the crap, so I clear it visually. Basement is the same deal. Didn't even try to clear that. What's the effing point? There's a classic car, 70s Cadillac or something, sitting in the garage that I can see from the outside. About 8 months later, the house is still exactly as I left it. No activity, resident must have died, and no one wants to touch the house. Keep writing the fire marshal to see if they can condemn the effing tinderbox, but no replies. Story 43. Got called out to a sewer line stoppage call. The tenant opened the door and smelled like walking death and was wearing pajamas. I could only assume he had been wearing for several weeks. Every inch of the walls were covered in sewer flies. Little bugs everywhere. The home smelled horrible from all the dog crap and urine, and I mean everywhere. There were roaches crawling in and out of the dish-filled sinks, and grease was on every surface of the kitchen. The smell was ungodly. There were cigarette butts everywhere. Spiders were thriving from the fly infestation that had been developing forever. The toilets and sinks in each bedroom were so dirty they were turning black. I literally stepped outside and threw up, then called the landlord to tell them I would not be working on this unit. They had no idea about the condition their apartment was in. In my opinion, gutting it, starting over, was the only option. They drove out to see for themselves, and the man began to bawl his eyes out about how his brother and parents were dead and he no longer had any family. He told us he had severe depression and stopped taking his pills. His exact words were, "I knew I should have started taking them, but all I could do was cry all the time for no reason." His landlord was going to kick him out and have his dog taken. The man had a breakdown in front of all of us, crying and saying his dog was all he had and please don't take him. When the landlord calmed down and realized this man's mental stability was way gone, he just called his wife and she met us there. They ended up helping him deep clean the entire unit and washed his dishes and hugged him. They agreed to let him keep the apartment and dog under the condition that he would get back on his pills and go to church with them every Sunday. I live in the South. The blockage I cleared was a 3-foot-long log of grease that built up because he had literally been dumping it down the toilets to not have to leave his small apartments. I think he had just let go of everything and his environment began to match what was happening on the inside of himself. I have never truly seen someone just give up on everything until that day. He was letting the dog crap in the house because he couldn't get himself up off the couch anymore. It was a level of severe depression that I never knew existed until I witnessed it. I honestly cried a little when I got in my van. I felt so bad that he was suffering that badly with no one to even talk to. It was a tough day. Thankfully, his landlord was a nice old Christian couple who decided to help instead of make things worse. Story 44. I used to do pest control. Roaches. The smell, it's distinct. You enter a house and you just know they have roaches. There are two types of people with roaches, the type who care and the type who don't. Unfortunately, the type who don't always want them gone without changing their way of life, even temporarily. What a lot of people don't realize is that 80% of roach removal is food source. Lots of folks think that the chemicals can do all the work. There's a reason why there are filthy people with and without roaches. I had one monthly account about an hour and a half drive from the office. Good old boy. I'm pretty sure he had super roaches. He would never clean up the corpses. I would tell him every time that if he would just vacuum weekly in this area, the problem would decrease significantly. He never did. Kept paying his monthly service. Every time I went there, it was a massive sea of cannibalism, roaches eating dead roaches and creating chemical resistances. Chemicals ain't what they used to be, let me tell you this. They're quick acting and short lived. That's part of the reason for the bedbug reemergence. On the other hand, I had a wonderful older black couple that also had a monthly account. Wholesome couple. Pictures of Jesus and Obama in the living room. They reminded me so much of my paternal grandparents, and I love them dearly. They were very diligent, kept the home clean, and did what I recommended they do. They had a tiny roach population. Unfortunately, they had a grandchild that was in a couple of different homes, and they kept reintroducing the problem. We kept it in check, though. It comes down to this. Roaches only infest where it's comfortable. Don't make it comfortable for them, and you won't have them. Story 45. I am an ABBA therapist. I work with children who have autism. I did in-home therapy with my last client for just over a year. He was an adorable 6-year-old, the eldest of 3 boys, and his mom was a young single parent. They were a very low-income family. Mom worked at Walmart and catered some drug-infused soul food on the side. They lived in a tiny, extremely cluttered condo. There were toys, clothes, baking and cooking materials, and all sorts of other nonsense everywhere. There were both kinds of roaches, bugs, and joint leftovers scattered about the floor. The youngest boy was 3 years old and was still being potty trained. His mom insisted on keeping him potty trained in a caged corner in the living room, where my client and I did therapy. You could not sit in that room without enduring the overwhelming smell of urine and crap. There was fecal matter smeared on the walls near the training potty, as well as stains on the carpet. The carpeting we sat on during therapy was sticky from God knows what. We couldn't sit on the couch because it was stacked with clothes and other nonsense. It took me a while to realize it was even a couch. The boys showered maybe once a week, if that. The walls were also covered in sticky crap, and the upstairs smelled like drugs all the time. The boys didn't even have real beds. Their mom took sleeping bags and put them on top of a lineup of like 3 to 4 milk crates. She slept on a blow-up mattress. It was pretty sad. The toys these kids had were all outdated and very dirty, but they were never hesitant to put them in their mouths or play with them. They were more interested in playing with things they shouldn't have access to, such as scissors, butter knives, or glass cups. Unfortunately, the family had their autism services revoked after my client's 1-year evaluation because, despite his living situation, I had made enough progress with him over the course of a year for the insurance company to determine that he was not autistic and that he simply had a learning disability. I truly hope that family is doing better, although I highly doubt it. The mom was all about her children. She just wasn't very clean, and she made poor decisions to try to make ends meet. And she was young, 28 years old, only 4 years my senior. It was just a very bad situation. I did my best to take my client and his brothers on field trips to get them out of the house because the living circumstances were just so unbearable. And I'd do anything to not sit there and smell dried up crap for 5 hours a day. I miss those kids dearly, every day. Story 46. I work for a restoration company that's brought in if there's a flood, fire, or mold at the property to restore it to pre-loss conditions and prepare it for the builders to come in and do their work. I could write a book about some of the things I've seen when going into homes. One particular thing that stood out was a flood job a couple of years ago when there were major floods down near the port. We were called in for a couple of jobs, and one of the houses we attended was a hoarder's house, which is usually fine because we run into a lot of them, but these people took it to the next level. The whole house was flooded, and every room was packed to the ceiling full of junk. Not even remotely useful items, just piles of magazines, knickknacks, and long-life foods. They had a couple of cats too, and there was crap everywhere, probably because the litter boxes were lost in the mess. At one point, we were going through the long-life foods, and they had these cartons of milks that were well past their expiration date, along with being completely soaked with flood water, so instant bin. In our line of work, if it's food or drink that's exposed to the damage, it's a write-off, for health and for safety reasons. So I explain this to the owners and take it out to the skip to dispose of. And I kid you not, 1 minute later, I see one of the owners take it out of the skip and put it back inside. We also had a fire job a couple of years later. The owners were a gay couple of who had love for bondage. Now, in most cases, you'd think if someone was coming into your home, you'd move and hide your special items. No, they didn't do that. They left it in full view for us to see like they were proud of it. They had this trapeze-like set hanging down from the ceiling. I don't know what you call it, but it had a full range of sex toys on one of the shelves. We had a young girl working with us on this job, and she was so scarred after it. The couple seemed nice, and I don't judge a book by its cover, but just check the bondage collection first. Story 47. Years ago, when I worked on durable medical equipment, I had to service a power wheelchair for a senior citizen. After meeting me at the door, he got out of his wheelchair and ambled to the chair to sit down. I made small talk as I worked on his chair. Part of our small talk revolved around the fact that he had just celebrated his 100th birthday. He asked, "How do you think I'm doing for 100?" I told him that I was amazed that he was so independent for being 100. I excused myself as I had diagnosed a bad charger and batteries that were unable to hold a charge, since the charger had failed and needed to go get a new charger and 2 deep cycle batteries. As I got back to the door, I let myself in. I noticed he was not on the couch where I had left him sitting and had instead gotten up and removed all of his clothes. Standing with his arms outstretched, he looked over at me and said, "Not a bad body for 100 years old, huh?" Okay, wow. I turned away and went over to work on the wheelchair and continued to put it back together. I felt him standing very near me just a few moments later and quietly prayed that he had gotten dressed, and thankfully he had. He thanked me for fixing his chair, wrote me a check, and then I left, traumatized for life. I can never unsee that. I made the mistake of calling my wife to tell her so I could get some sympathy, and instead, I gave her ammunition. Every once in a while, when I get feeling too good about myself, she responds, "Remember that one time you saw that really old naked guy?" I shudder, and unfortunately, I still do remember it very vividly. Too long didn't read? I saw a naked 100-year-old man, and it's as bad or even worse than you might envision. Story 48. I used to work as a tidy-up man. I'm a German speaker, sorry for the language and the strange words sometimes. And I saw a lot of really strange things in houses, which had to be normal for the people. Maybe the behavior is considered as illness, but it's really strange anyways. So the people were already dead when we cleaned the houses. I was younger back then and I forgot to make pictures. It was 10 years ago. The newspaper couple. An old couple lived in a small flat, and the only thing they did was sort and organize the free newspapers you find in front of your door. But they had a special way to do this. They cut every headline and every picture out of every bunch of these newspapers and put them into a ring folder. They did this for over 40 years. We found papers from the 70s. Every, and I mean every, wall in the flat were in ring folders. But because at some point they didn't manage to do it right, they started to put the newspapers they still have on the floor. The floor in the entire flat was full of newspapers up to 50 centimeters high. In their basement, we found a small box of plastic files with stones, sand, and water. It was labeled, "Scoured and Packed, 1968. In German, this hits the humor my college friends and I had, and we still giggle about that abgekocht und eingepackt. The bottle lady. She was a retired gynecologist and lived in her old doctor's office. The interior was from the 70s and there was something like everything in a normal doctor's office, but she lived in this thing with no bed, no kitchen. She slept on a couch in the waiting room. The only non-doctor's office thing she had was a TV she placed there. In the laboratories was a fridge she also used. She was an alcoholic and drank gin only and brought the same small bottle from a small supermarket, but she didn't throw the empty bottles away. She placed them all over her doctor's office and her home. Everywhere, gin bottles on every surface, mountains of gin bottles everywhere you look. She only had a small path from the door to the couch to the TV, to the toilet, and to the fridge. Story 49. I used to be a cable installation technician. In that time, I had quite a few interesting installs ranging from near hookups to poor senile old people, chicken art on walls along with chicken sculptures, and Muslim women that weren't allowed to talk to me or tell me where the F to put their stuff. So since we're talking about the worst, I guess the two that come to mind are getting to my first job in a semi-rural area. It's maybe 7:15 in the morning. I get out of my truck and go to ring the doorbell. Wait 3 to 4 minutes and it's some little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. She answers the door. No big deal, kids answer the door all the time. The effed up part is that she was naked. No PJs or underwear or anything, and I ask her if she could go please get her parents. She says they are asleep. I go back to my truck and I call the customer, and sure enough, they're asleep and had no idea that their daughter, without any clothes, had answered the door. That was definitely a super awkward install. There was this other time I get to the customer's house and had to do a triple take because it looked abandoned. Porch was waist high with trash and junk and old crap. I climb through it and ring the doorbell. And a couple minutes later, the door rope is pulled from the other side. Door rope because there wasn't a doorknob, just rope tied through the hole that you would install the doorknob. I get inside and the whole staircase leading up to the second floor was just as bad as the porch, and holy F did it stink in there. I get inside and this fat old lady starts barking orders at me without ever leaving her bed. Bowls, cups, and plates of scrap food or leftovers or whatever you call it when you're done eating and you just leave the trash sitting there. Yeah, that crap was everywhere. I told the lady I couldn't do this install because it needed holes drilled and didn't have permission from the homeowner, and I got the F out of there quick and fast. Story 50. I have 2 stories. Oddly, I do commercial painting on the side and fire EMS full time, so I've been in thousands of homes. First story from painting. Lady lives in an apartment for years, so wants a complimentary repaint on her apartment. Okay, pretty common. Go inside. Hundreds of empty wine and whiskey bottles all over the floor, literally everywhere, along with stacked dishes, cigarette butts, and packages. Couldn't see most of the floor except a path. Then by the bathroom, poop was all over the floor too, and she didn't have pets. Oh, when I tell you I could taste the smell, she decided she wasn't going to use the toilet anymore. So yeah, no painting was done that day, management was called, and adult services. Second story for fire and EMS. Get a call to a home for elderly woman not feeling well. Again, very common. Arrive and I meet a mentally challenged individual that led us to said elderly woman. The smell was something I never experienced. House is utter filth. Lady is covered in feces and urine. I get her out of the chair that she was sitting in, and she is stuck to the cushion. Turns out she literally rotted to the chair. Rotten flesh, feces, and urine. Nope. The mentally challenged person that met us had been caring for the woman and apparently only feeding her chocolate-covered cherries and water. Her butt cheeks were nearly rot off of the bone. I have never retched so hard in my life. Story 51. Okay, so after reading all these, I realize my job isn't that bad. But from what everyone is explaining, you have to realize that when people die or move out of these gross hoarder homes, someone has to clean them. I'm the residential cleaner. In doing so, I clean homes. I don't clean personal belongings, nor does my job really entail tidying, but often I will fold blankets and do some light organizing. Anyways, one day my partner and I have to move out a scheduled 3 to 4 hours. It's in the downtown core where mostly nicer but older homes are located. When we arrive, we realize it's an older home that's been converted into apartments. We kind of looked at each other when we realized we had 3 to 4 hours there, but continued on. Upon entering the apartment, we were shocked. The man who had lived there, and was still living there, was a very disgusting man. He had claimed he had a head injury years prior to moving into this place, and that's why it got so bad. Meanwhile, every corner had stacks of cases of King Can beers, most empty, and also littered across the apartment. The apartment itself was maybe the size of an average living room. A small bathroom to the left, small kitchen to the right, living room and bedroom that barely fit in his double bed. When I went into the kitchen, the smell was so bad I instantly got a stomachache. There was baked and refried beans everywhere, in the sink, all over the stove, the walls, the floor, the table, even inside the cupboards. It looked like it had been there for months. The rest of the apartment was pretty trashed as well, mostly beer caps, which we did not dispose of, and dirty clothes. I spent a good 2 hours just scooping refried beans off and out of everything. When I finished, I then had to attempt to wipe down everything. Another hour was spent scrubbing the floor, which also was covered in beans. All that I can say is I can't ever look at beans the same way again. Story 52. Not me, but my coworker. I work as a concierge, and we sometimes are required to enter a residence if there is an emergency. Anyways, my coworker, who was 22 at the time, heard a brief noise, but it wasn't so loud from the desk, so he ignored it until he got several calls from residents saying that a very loud noise that sounded like a small bomb had gone off directly below their unit, which was located on the 3rd floor. He went to the unit that people had reported and had to go through a suite on the 2nd floor. From the corner of his eye, he could see something on the deck. that was very unusual. When he went to investigate it further, it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. When he described it to me, he said it looked like spaghetti, and as he got closer to the desk, he saw what looked something of a meaty texture and yellow noodle-like strands. He took a good look at the scene, and after several seconds, he could see bloodied body parts, like organs and fingers and other limbs. It was obvious to him what had happened. A female, who we became aware of later, that was going through some mental health issues, who did not show any signs to us or to my coworker that day, other than acting a little strange, but nothing really that stood out at the desk. She jumped from the 22nd floor of our building, off her patio, and exploded like a watermelon on the desk of one of the units on the second floor. Earlier that day, my coworker reported that we saw her walk in with a yellowish type dress that was stringy, and that's why the scene he saw looked like spaghetti. The police trauma team arrived and had to do a full investigation and cleanup. It was all covered under insurance, and everything on the patio of the unit had to be replaced. My coworker received several weeks of vacation pay until he felt he was okay to come back. He says to this day he can't get the image out of his head. When he thinks about it, he remembers the scene as if it were crystal clear. It was a very traumatizing experience for him. Too long didn't read, coworker received a complaint about a loud bomb-like noise coming from a unit, and a woman with mental health problems jumped off, and the scene looked like a very big spaghetti bomb and exploded because of the dress she wore. Story 53. German medic here. Too late for the party? I can open with my best one. A mother, about 50 to 60 years old, calls us because her alcohol-addicted daughter threw up while on the phone and is non-responsive since. They live across the street from each other. Mother, my partner, and I ring the doorbell of all apartments until neighbors open the front door. We climb stairs and double-check with the mother that we are standing in front of the right door. No answer to our ringing, banging, or yelling. We call dispatch for police and kick in the door. It swings open and crashes into dozen empty glass wine bottles. We turn on our flashlights and see a corridor full of empty wine bottles. I'm talking hoarder style. Only one small path to follow into every room. Bottles everywhere. On counters stacked upon each other. Drawers were opened and filled with bottles, everywhere possible. We shout, but no one answers. I look into the kitchens, and there's a pot of something resembling noodles covered in mold and fungi growing. We follow the path into a small living room and hear the TV sounds behind a door. Colleague opens it. What do you want? Was the first sentence the patient tries to articulate. Her being drunk, we barely understood the gibberish. About 40 years old, obese, laying in a bed surrounded by bottles and buckets full of vomit and crap. There were trails running off the mattress at head and butt height, as if she didn't even bother getting out of bed and just moved her head to butt at the edge. And oh my goodness, the smell. The whole situation got topped off by old VHS adult content cassettes lying about between a few obviously used dildos. Patient was able to sit up but refuses any help. So another call to dispatch to get an emergency doctor on scene, as he has the legal authority, together with police and another witnessing state employee, to force admission to a psych ward or restraining by police to administer medical drugs against patient's will in case of emergency. Now you can imagine how thrilled police were to act upon that when the doc would arrive. Well, doc enters the scene and retches. By now, patient is cleared up, is oriented, knows personal info, date, and location. Still refuses any help and denies offer of a ride to the hospital. Also refuses breathalyzer test. Glasgow coma scale 15. Police inform us that her husband has been contacted by the mother and husband is currently riding his bike home since he was at a bar. Doctor tells her she can stay if she manages walking into the living room without help. Her answer is one I will never forget. She claims her shorts are dirty and she has to turn them inside out first. She manages just that, pulls them up and walks a straighter line than expected. Patient is fully conscious and oriented, and other than the addiction, no other psychological preconditions. Mother says she will stay. Police will wait for the husband. We get out of there as quick as possible. Never dodged a crappier bullet than that. Story 54. I'm a health inspector who specialized in housing, and it was my job to go in and condemn homes. I've seen some things in my day. Once I went into a guy's rental who was part of a dumpster diving movement. So he would bring kilos of food out of grocery store dumpsters, meat, fruits, and vegetables, ready-to-eat meals, anything he could find thrown away. It would go bad because it was way more than he could ever eat, and he would not throw it out. They basically had to scrape the fly poop off the walls. The guy was also part of a free hug movement and was so hurt I didn't want to hug him. Hoarders and squalor, one who hoarded old beauty school practice heads from the 80s. Animal hoarders. I've seen cat, pigeon, assorted birds, and rabbit hoarding. A hoard of adult content, human waste, a family of 3 older siblings all holding together. Once I dealt with a diabetic living in squalor, and his house was a sea of used needles on the ground. Once the person hoarding hadn't been seen in months, and I didn't know if I would be finding a corpse in there once the locksmith opened the door. The information I had before going in also included that the dog was missing, but the cat's corpse was in the freezer. I could go on. I stopped doing housing inspections a few years ago because it was starting to mess with me. Story 55. I used to work in home health care. I got paid a little extra because I disclosed that I'd be willing to go out to patients in our caseload who may have lived in problematic or otherwise hazardous households. I went to an elderly hoarder couple's house once, not dirty filthy, but just extremely cluttered with 20 plus years of crap that hadn't been touched. The first house visit, kind of like a meet and greet with my supervisor, was fine, and I met the husband and wife and they liked me. The next house visit, I was winding my way through huge piles and stacks of crap and realized the husband wasn't sitting with his wife where he usually is. I also noticed that she was soiled. She couldn't toilet herself without assistance, and there was a smell in the room, like waste. I asked where her husband was, and she replied that he'd gone to the bathroom a couple of hours ago. That would have been around 3 a.m. I went looking for him and found him crushed beneath a dresser and television set that he'd been trying to move to slip between in the doorway to the bathroom. I dialed 911 and then my supervisor. My actual patient lived at home for a while under constant care, but eventually started to refuse to get out of bed. As home healthcare workers, we had to abide by this wish, and she contracted pneumonia and then died in the hospital. I've worked in nursing homes and walked into rooms to find a person who was previously charted as being in the active stages of dying without any vital signs, but never witnessed the aftermath of an accidental death. Still gets to me sometimes thinking about her. Unable to get up to check on him, I'm sure she heard the crash and couldn't dial 911 because he kept the phone on the other side of his recliner, and she couldn't get up and walk to him because of advanced diabetic wounds on her legs and feet. She was miserable and felt very guilty for the last year of her life. I know she's in a better place now. Story 56. Home care nurse here. Some insights. First day on the job, asked if I could wash my hands. The patient's only bathroom was in the back of the house, past the kitchen, where the sink was out of commission, and through a door partially blocked by the refrigerator jutting out into the passageway. I'm skinny, and I still couldn't get in. The solution that the family had devised was to take the fridge door off its hinges so it could be completely removed and leaned up against a cabinet so a normal-sized person can finally squeeze into the bathroom. I had a lady who hoarded stuff in her apartment, floor to ceiling, except for a 16-inch wide passageway to her bed. Claimed that she liked having stuff to hold on to, so she wouldn't need her walker. Also, she never bathed, and instead used the shower curtain rod as a place to hang her clothes. Tub was also filled floor to ceiling with more crap. One patient lived in a tiny old house with 3 huge, smelly dogs with matted hair and at least 3 cats. All of her animals just peed and crapped wherever they pleased. The carpet was originally a light blue, from what I could see peeking out from under the furniture, but it had become a mottled mocha brown. It felt crunchy. Also, she had several real Steinway pianos in the living room, but they had been repurposed as flat surfaces upon which to store a bunch of useless, dusty crap. They must have been beautiful before decades of cat urine ate away at the finish and into the wood. Several of my patients live in a massive high-rise apartment building that you couldn't miss. It looked alright from the outside, and there was a fountain in the lobby, and the folks at the front desk were extremely professional. But the more I had to go there, the more I began to hate that building. I think it started with when I had to poop. I found a restroom on the ground floor that the maintenance crew clearly forgot about. Harsh fluorescent light fixtures that flickered like a horror movie, and each one held several dozen dead flies. Speaking of flies, the ones that hadn't yet found their final resting place in the lights all congregated around the 2 urinals, which had been covered in black trash bags. Despite the trash bags, it looked like a few brave souls tried to use them anyway. The drain in the middle of the floor took care of the little rivers of rancid urine. I went for a stall, only to find the toilet literally brimming with feces and soggy used toilet paper. Also more flies. The other stall had a toilet that worked, but the seat had been removed. I hovered over it to poop, and the lights went out. Of course, there was no toilet paper in the dispenser or the paper towel dispensers by the prison style sinks. Also, no soap. The same attention to detail was paid to the rest of the building. The elevators were upwardly mobile urinals. You could always find poop smeared on a wall or door frame when walking down the hall. And even though no smoking signs had cigarette burns on them, I had patients in there who never left their own apartments simply because it wasn't safe to do. Story 57. I'm a paramedic. People that live in squalor usually wind up sick and needing medical attention. A few years ago, I responded to a trailer out in the sticks for a shortness of breath call. Hoarder house doesn't do this one justice. It was a hoarder house that was decomposing under its own filth at the same time. The floors were rotting and caving in. It smelled like rotten death. A stink fist of hobo's a-hole punched you in the mouth as soon as the door opened, and it was summer. The floors were also caked in human, mixed with animal, excrement. Green flies buzzing everywhere. There were cats, dogs, and chickens in the home, trash heaped in piles. You had to kick through it to get to the patient. One side of the home had been burned and the wall crudely knocked in. The kitchen smelled like rotten meat in an old refrigerator that hadn't been plugged in for a year, and an ashtray, cigarette butts everywhere. Fruit flies buzzed, startled as I passed the rotten fruit on the counter. I kicked through piles of beer cans and prayed that ammonia smell wasn't a working mom-and-pop drug lab. No, wait, I hope it is, so I can be put out of my misery. My asthma began to flare up. I felt my pocket to make sure I had my rescue inhaler. Each inhalation, my lungs began to clamp down, pleading with me, get the F out or die. I continued my journey to the back of the trailer. I should say I have an iron stomach. 6 years in a trauma ICU will do that to you. But this place was a health hazard to even be around. My heart felt so bad for those people, but it was so awful I had trouble processing the magnitude of how horrible it really was. There was a dead cat in the living room. All that, and what really got to me was in the back room with the patient. And in one of the trash heaps I saw movement. I looked over to see several newborn puppies covered in afterbirth, just kind of whimpering and crawling around. For some reason, the filth in the newborn pups was so unsettling. Never mind the bedside commode, urine and excrement coating the floor, or how my foot came through a section of the rotten floor, or how the poop now caked my boots. It was those puppies, crawling around, whimpering with their eyes still closed. Yes, we called it into social services. I had to load the patient and book it out of there. When I got to the station, I took a shower and changed and evaluated my life choices. Story 58. As you might have guessed by the username, I was a property claims adjuster in Alabama. No longer live there, nor am I from there. I just moved there for the job. I got what seemed to be an average leaky roof claim. I met the insureds at their door, an older couple, probably in their late 50s, early 60s, and they couldn't have been nicer. They told me the damage is actually to the double-wide trailer on their property where their son lived. No problem. Smaller roof and easier to walk on. The trailer was a little outdated and worn, but it wasn't in bad shape. As we walk in to take a look at the leakage spots in the home, the insured's son is sitting in a recliner, nattily attired in a Metallica t-shirt and some oddly short shorts, sipping on a Monster Energy drink and watching Fox News. I'm led to his bedroom, where the worst of the leakage is. I'm 2 steps in the room when I notice his walls are adorned with some very unique artwork. About every 2 to 3 feet hangs a picture with 2 or more humanoid animals. Imagine if BoJack Horseman was anime. Each creature was very well drawn in clear detail. However, each creature was also drawn with an impossibly large chicken. Seriously, like a third of the size of its oddly muscular body. The creep factor of this only increases as I notice a few pictures show a horse humanoid appearing to be forcibly sodomizing a bird humanoid creature. The bird was drawn with effing tears in its eyes, you guys. I can't get out of this gosh dang bedroom fast enough. I didn't even measure the room, just ballparked it, took pictures of the water stains, taking great care not to capture any of the artwork in my inspection photos, and I come out and this creepy effer is still sitting in his recliner, energy drink in hand, but now he's staring at me. I practically do backflips to avoid eye contact or any kind of communication of any sort, meanwhile forcing the most painfully awkward small talk of all time with this fine young gentleman's parents. Social contract is an incredibly powerful thing. The last straw was the picture of a bull humanoid, self-massaging himself, and the juice is all over another bull's face that the mother effer had on his fridge, like it was an A+ spelling test. I could not get out of there fast enough. Story 59. I've worked in EMS for a number of years, and there's one call that I still think about pretty regularly. My partner and I were called to respond to abdominal pain at a residence in a notoriously worse for wear part of our city. We get to the house, and the place looks a bit run down, but nothing out of the ordinary. We walked up to the door and knocked, announcing our presence and hoping someone will come to the door. After a few seconds, we hear someone shout that they're upstairs, in pain and unable to come to the door. They asked us to let ourselves in and find her in her bedroom. We get inside, and the ground floor looks in pretty good shape, almost like nobody lives there and it had been untouched for a while. We went upstairs to find our patient and quickly discovered why. Our patient was in bed, and it became pretty clear that she hadn't left in quite some time. She was sitting in a combination of feces, urine, and food containers and wrappers. She also weighed upwards of 500 pounds and wasn't more than 5'5". When we asked what the issue was, she told us that she'd been feeling an intense pain in her side that got unbearable. Knowing that we'd need assistance to even move her to do an exam, we call for an assistance from the fire department. Fire department arrives and we managed to move her around enough to get an exam going. And when we rolled her to her side, we found out what the issue was. A rat had begun chewing on her flesh in the process and had died and began to decompose. The smell was something indescribable, but the closest I can think of is rotting flesh mixed with acid urine and stale food. Not to mention the massive festering infection that she had going on in the area. We managed to get her onto a stretcher and into the ambulance and got her to the hospital, and I haven't heard from her or about her since. I really still wonder how she's doing or whether she addressed that rat problem. Oh my goodness gracious, man. All of these are so sad. But guys, that concludes our stories of sad, a little disturbing, and cluttered homes, if you will. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and if you have any stories of your own that you want to share, drop those down below, and I am going to go clean up my house. It's fairly decent, but, I feel in the mood to make it a little tidier.